It was a pretty ordinary day for Simon. He was streaming as usual, when suddenly something unexpected happened. Right at the moment when more than 52,000 viewers had gathered for his broadcast, his girlfriend suddenly ran into his room and loudly declared that it was over between them. She said she tried to love Simon, but now she finally realized that he was the fakest person she knew. She then slammed the door behind her and ran out of the room, leaving the protagonist and all his spectators in bewilderment. And then Simon realized in horror what exactly his now ex-girlfriend had said. She had called him a fake in front of such a huge audience. All the viewers immediately started writing him offensive comments and accusing him of offending the girl, without even knowing whether she was telling the truth or not. Soon after, the protagonist realized that love never seemed real to him, no matter how hard he tried to believe otherwise. And now that he realized that all this was unreal, he didn't know why he should pretend and act as if it wasn't so. He didn't even know that at that moment he was being watched by an android girl who watched every one of his streams and knew what was going on in his life. A whole month has passed since that fateful day, and the main character decided to move on and started going on dates with girls. However, each of these dates ended more or less the same way. He behaved disgustingly, and the girls simply left, not forgetting to insult him as a parting shot. So, after 3 months, absolutely nothing had changed. All his dates ended the same way. They simply wished him to burn in hell. After another girl got up from the table and left, Simon realized that this could not go on any longer. The workers at the cafe he regularly frequented were already well aware of how his dates ended and were ready to clean up the spilled coffee in the so-called Simon zone once again. One day, Piper the waitress approached him and said that she wanted to buy him a coffee, but apparently the other girl had already done it for her. Simon replied that she could laugh at him as much as she wanted, but it perked him up much better than any coffee in this place, although it would have been better if there hadn't been so much of it. However, he tried to console himself with the fact that he was going to throw the clothes in the wash anyway, while Piper was surprised that he showed up to the date in bunny slippers. The young man said he wasn't going to be sad, as his favorite streamer, Rena, was supposed to start a broadcast that night. At the same time, the waitress was very surprised that he was willing to dress up for a streamer who doesn't know him, but not for a real date with real girls. The hero explained that Rena had few subscribers until recently, but he always believed in her, even giving her a couple of hints and tips, and she worked very hard. Simon was sure that if he asked her out on a date, she definitely wouldn't spill coffee on him. And then Piper asked him why he went on these dates if he hated them so much. The hero explained that if he did not attend them, he would die at the hands of his sister, who very persistently tried to woo him. At that moment, the owner of the establishment, Eli, approached the waitress and said that, speaking about falling from a height, he could not blame this guy. He began to think that if any of his breakups had been as public as Simon's, he would have left the internet forever. At that moment, Piper really felt sympathy for him. She saw that this guy was trying his best no matter what. After this, the main character returned back to his home. He had already prepared everything to start the stream, but at the last moment he changed his mind. He knew he wasn't in the mood to stream, and judging by the bottles and food bags scattered around him, he hadn't been in the mood for quite some time. After what happened with his ex, he went on a 7-day binge and played a dating sim, doing it live for his audience. However, since the memories of the breakup were still fresh, he couldn't hold back his tears while trying to build relationships with virtual girls. Moreover, in order to somehow lift his spirits, he made a lot of impulse purchases, and now his shelves were filled with various anime figures. Moreover, he hit rock bottom when he started playing gacha games and ended up wasting a huge amount of money on them. Clips from those days still popped up on his social media, and each time it felt like a knife to the gut, setting him back another week. Losing subscribers wasn't the worst thing that happened to Simon, but partners and advertising agencies were terminating their contracts with him. Moreover, almost everyone he knew from streaming, his so-called friends, turned their backs on him. But there was still one girl who was always with him. It was Rena, and the main character was ready to do a lot for her. He even created a second account to watch her broadcasts, realizing that watching from the main account could raise questions. When the stream was about to start, Simon put on clean clothes and went to the website. Soon the stream started, and the cheerful white-haired girl greeted all the viewers, who were very happy to see her. The streamer approached them, saying that she was going to play Necrotic Nightmare and would not stop until she defeated the third boss. The main character himself was ready to go through this path with her and help her until the very end. The girl tried very hard to pass this boss, but she just couldn't do it. But the support of the audience helped her morally. The protagonist worried about her as if he himself was playing the game and something very valuable was at stake. However, Rena still couldn't get through the game and she was killed time after time. Simon had a lot of fun watching everything that was going on, and it really gave him a warm feeling being on the stream. At some point, Rena was finally able to defeat this ill-fated dragon, and all the spectators immediately began to support and praise her. The girl herself was also incredibly happy that after so many attempts she finally managed to do it. She was glad that everything worked out for them. Otherwise, this stream could have lasted all night, while Simon was upset that another perfect stream had come to an end. The girl then thanked viewers for their support over the past few months, adding that she still can't believe they have come this far. The protagonist was pleased with how she was behaving, because it was he who taught her to remain humble and grateful. These were the basics of streaming that he told her about. The girl continued to talk about how, when she started this journey, everything seemed real to her, and at that moment, Simon's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a knock on the door. He immediately jumped up from his chair, not understanding who could come to him at such a late hour. Rena continued to talk about how the community, her friends, and their support made the whole experience real. As Simon walked towards the door, he thought about how he had warned her not to say things like that because they could backfire. Meanwhile, Rena continued, saying that she just needed to start believing in it just like other people believed in her. As Simon was about to open the door, he thought that someone's faith, unfortunately, cannot make something real. And yet the girl continued to say that it was all definitely worth it. At that moment, the main character abruptly opened the door and rudely asked the guest what he needed, since it was already 3 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly, he heard Rena's voice, calling on her viewers to let it all become real. When he looked in front of him, he froze in surprise to see a girl who said that she had been looking for him for a very long time. A girl who was practically a copy of his favorite streamer stood at his door and confessed her love to him. At this moment, the main character froze in horror, completely unable to understand what to do in such a situation. There was an awkward pause between them, but the stranger seemed unfazed and continued to smile broadly. However, the hero still did not believe that this was really happening, so he hurried to close the door. He hoped that when he opened it, there would be no one behind it. But as soon as he did, he saw the radiant smile of the blonde girl again. Then he closed the door again, as if he thought that it would protect him from the incredibleness of everything that was happening. He tried to digest what had just happened. His favorite VTuber had just appeared before him in the flesh and openly confessed her love to him. Quite quickly, the protagonist realized that it was just his dream, since he often fell asleep while watching someone else's stream. Then Simon opened the door, and the girl immediately walked inside without waiting for permission. The hero, clearly understanding that this was just a dream, immediately began to behave as if nothing had happened. He invited Rena from his dream inside and said that he was glad to see her. The girl immediately smiled, saying that she really liked the name Rena, that the corporation called her G1-RL, but she liked the name Rena more since they used her appearance. The protagonist didn't understand what corporation she was talking about, but it all sounded very suspicious. He didn't understand why his brain decided to come up with some nonsense for him in his own dream. Rena, meanwhile, sat down on the sofa and said that his apartment was very cozy and that there was an even distribution of clothes and garbage. And upon hearing this, Simon immediately began to clean. He was surprised that even in his dreams he would have to clean the apartment. But the girl hastened to assure him that, in her opinion, his dreams should be quite clean. Simon told her that these words were a real relief for him, after which he and Rena laughed loudly. However, at that moment, he suddenly froze, realizing what she had just said and realizing that it made absolutely no sense. He said they were in a dream, but Rena offered to slap him on the cheek so he could make sure that all this was happening in reality. Then she finally explained that she was a runaway android from the corporation, that she was Project G1-RL, but from now on she could just be called Rena, and that she came here to help him. Simon was very surprised that it was an android in front of him, because she seemed very much alive to him. And, apparently, the future really had arrived. Rena immediately rushed towards him and grabbed him by the clothes, saying that she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. She said that she watched his streams for a very long time and studied every one of his Let's Plays and videos. Moreover, she added that she even saw his breakup with his ex-girlfriend live on air and watched his famous dating sim marathon. Simon noted that the latter didn't need to be mentioned, and then asked what she meant when she said she wanted to help him. The girl explained that she was trying to get him back on his feet and pull him out of the emotional hole he had fallen into in recent months. Then, her eyes twinkling with delight, she said that he could teach her love in the same way if he wanted. Rena explained that when she saw him break up with his ex-girlfriend, she suddenly felt something. The thing was, this had never happened before. But upon reflection, she realized that this feeling was connected with the word love. When she couldn't take it anymore, she simply ran away from the corporation to learn about love through Simon. At that moment, the main character didn't know what to answer. He just looked away, and sadness was reflected on his face. He said that she would be better off without all this love. But the girl did not understand why he said that, because he was happy when she told him that she loved him. But the hero said that it was different, since she was copying his favorite VTuber, and he was simply caught off guard. But for Rina, these words sounded unconvincing. Taking his hand, she said that she saw how much he adored Rina on her streams, and so she decided to copy her. Then the girl approached him and said that she didn't understand love. But if he helped her, then maybe the next time she said it, it would mean something. The protagonist was in a stupor. He was convinced that she did not understand what she was saying, but at the same time, his heart could not stop pounding. He tried to convince himself that she was an android, and then he realized that if he understood from the start that she was not real, then she would not be able to hurt him. Then he finally decided to agree and asked Rina what he needed to do. The girl immediately started jumping with delight, saying that everything was very simple. The main character would just need to meet a bunch of people. Simon decided to play along, but quickly declared that he would never do that. He assumed it was all a cunning plan by his sister, and then explained that he actually had his own moral principles. And then Rina suddenly rushed at him and knocked him to the floor, pinning him down, apologizing to him for this, but saying that the time was up. She loomed over him, and it made Simon freeze with a mixture of different feelings. And then Rina said that the thing was that his first date was already on the way. This moment was so close and intimate that the protagonist again began to think that it was just a dream. And then suddenly the girl fell silent and looked closely into his eyes. Before Simon could process anything, she leaned towards him and kissed him tenderly on the forehead. The protagonist froze, and although it was very pleasant, he still could not believe that this was really happening to him. The girl at that moment still had her lips on his forehead, and it seemed that this kiss was something more. When Rina finally stood up and walked away from him, the system reported that the harmonized emotional algorithm system of romantic training had been activated. The girl was delighted, saying that their connection was successful and that she and Simon were now connected. But the hero himself did not understand what she had just done. Rina explained that she would learn through him using a simulation of this system, and thanks to it, he would survive any date. Simon didn't understand what she was talking about because he could survive any date. He had plenty of them. But Rina explained that this one would be a little different. At that moment, the hero suddenly heard the glass behind him crack sharply. When he turned around to see what it was, he suddenly saw a woman in military uniform fly into their room through the hole in the window. She landed like a true fighter, but it turned out she clearly had no good intentions. However, Rina continued to smile. She pointed at the girl and told Simon that if this date went badly, she would kill him. The girl herself stated that the object had been discovered and asked the android to move away from this beggarly recluse. Rina immediately started waving at her. She knew the girl's name was April and asked her why she was in such a hurry. However, April herself was clearly not in a good mood. She said that Rina was the reason why she was in such a hurry. The thing was, she thought she was a valuable asset to the corporation who ran away to meet her favorite streamer. But now this guy knows too much. At this moment, the main character himself did not understand at all what was happening. Rina assumed April was talking about Simon having to disappear, and the girl confirmed this, saying that they shouldn't leave any witnesses. The hero was horrified. All this seemed like absolute nonsense to him. He believed that his life could end like this. And at that moment, he suddenly saw that the system was offering him 3 options for answering April, and it all looked a lot like the dating simulator that he liked to play. At that moment, the system announced the start of the initial setup, after which it announced the beginning of a date with April. Rina explained that thanks to her and the new heart system she installed in his brain, his dating problems were solved. However, Simon was horrified, because the only problem now was that April wanted to sever the connection between her gun and his head. Rina sheepishly explained that she hadn't known that the relationship between a person and a weapon had to be taken into account, but Simon asked her not to pretend, as she knew perfectly well what he meant. At this point, April intervened in the conversation. She ordered the hero to stop fooling around and said that she would do everything quickly, after which she asked Rina to close her eyes. She pointed a gun at the hero, and at that moment 3 possible answers suddenly appeared before him, one of which was one word: Raoul. Looking at this window, the protagonist realized that he was right. This really did look like a dating simulator. The problem was, though, that he only saw 2 options, and one of them didn't make any sense, but he had no choice, so he decided to do what he could. The hero chose the third option and said that April apparently was trying to hit him in the heart, but she didn't need a gun for that. But apparently, these words did not make any impression on the girl, so she fired a warning shot. She was surprised that she had put a gun to Simon's face, and his first reaction was to hit on her. And she even began to think that for him, it was all some kind of joke. Simon angrily turned to Rena, saying that the only real option the system had given him hadn't worked, and the second one was complete nonsense. At that moment, April approached him again and asked if he had any last words, adding that she was ready to convey them to his family and asking that they be made less pathetic. However, the main character did not know what to say to her. He just froze and looked up at her. He started looking through the answer options again, and since the third option didn't work, he was left with only the one that had Raoul's name in it. Since he had no other choice, he said the name Raoul with horror in his eyes. At that moment, April suddenly froze, as she had not expected to hear that name at all. She lowered the pistol and exhaled heavily, but with each passing moment her face grew darker. Simon, meanwhile, felt some relief at the thought that it had worked, but he was too quick to rejoice. April immediately walked up to him and hit him in the face with the butt of her gun as hard as she could. She then grabbed the protagonist by the clothes, lifted him off the ground, and began asking him what he had just said. The girl angrily demanded that he explain how he knew this name. She was so absorbed in her anger that she didn't notice some kind of grenade-like device fall out of her pocket. Rena picked it up and began to examine it, while the hero turned to her and said that this simulator does not work, and asked her to do something. April, however, stated that there were hundreds of ways to use a gun, and she knew all the ones that were suitable for pain and torture. So she ordered Simon to tell her everything he knew right now before she gutted him. At that moment, Rena suddenly approached them, holding a grenade in her hands. She turned to April and said that this thing fell out of her pocket. The system showed the protagonist that it was a military-grade flashbang grenade, and that detonation was imminent. Before he could say anything, the grenade in the android girl's hands suddenly began to glow, preparing to explode. Both Simon and April realized at that moment that the situation was worse than ever. All three of them quickly closed their eyes from the blinding light of the grenade, and Simon asked Rena where she got that thing in the first place. The girl was happy because she was not human, and the loss of her sight even seemed funny to her. However, at that moment, she suddenly felt the main character come up to her and firmly take her hand. He immediately pulled her towards the exit of the room and said that they needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. At this point, April was still blinded, but when she opened her eyes, she saw that the two were already at the door, and Rena said goodbye to her. As they ran up the stairs, the main character kept rubbing his watery eyes, as they hurt a lot after that. However, he suddenly noticed that a group of armed soldiers in bulletproof vests were moving straight towards them, and it seemed that they were coming specifically for him. Realizing that this route wouldn't work for them, he grabbed Rena's hand tighter and headed with her into another corridor. One of the soldiers radioed in that they had visual contact with the object, that they were heading for the roof, and the person on the radio ordered him not to shoot until they had a clear line of fire. He explained that they couldn't risk Rena, also noting that the android had chosen this name herself, and that this was what she was now called. The man on the radio asked if he understood correctly that the project had given itself a name, and April confirmed this, adding that she had also changed her appearance. The girl thought for a moment and even noted with a smile that this new look suited her very well. Meanwhile, the hero was still running to the roof, and Rena noted that the date was going well, but he told her that this was not a date, but an attempted murder. He remembered April's words about leaving no witnesses, and realized he was unlikely to leave this building alive. However, the girl was not despondent and noted that despite all this, he was still alive. She reminded him of the third answer option, which involved flirting. Rena explained that these words bought Simon time, catching April off guard. Then the protagonist chose the second option, and in the end, everything led to them being able to escape. Simon began to suspect that her dating sim knew all of this was going to happen, and she suggested that it was possible because the system was running simulations in his brain. She created it for dating, but she had never been on a date herself. But she knew that they required being alive, and so her system tried its best. Simon was clearly shocked by what he ended up getting for opening his front door at 3 in the morning. At that moment, Rena suddenly saw that the main character was holding her hand. She experienced a strange but pleasant feeling from the fact that his hand was so nice and warm. At that moment, the main character opened the door, and together they ran out into a new room. As they ran forward, Simon said that if they reached the roof, they should find a fire escape there. But at that moment, he was suddenly interrupted by something unexpected. Someone fired a shot literally a few centimeters from his face, miraculously hitting the window. The hero was horrified, realizing that snipers had also come for him, and asked Rina which bloodthirsty corporation had created her. The girl herself was very surprised that these people took such a step, and apparently they really wanted to get her back. At that moment, Simon looked through the open door and saw soldiers running past, apparently thinking that the target was heading for the roof. Rina told the hero that she couldn't leave because she and Simon were already connected, and she thought they would kill him anyway, and then the hero suggested that she activate the system with the heart. But the girl explained that she couldn't just turn the system on and off as it was designed for dating. However, she did add that the date could start at absolutely any time. And then Simon asked her what could trigger it. The girl replied that it could be flirting, a look, emotional tension in general, things that make your heart stop, and then the hero asked if she could work on her. The girl replied that she would like to, but still does not understand what love is, so the system cannot even simulate her reactions. The hero then jokingly suggested seducing the vending machine that was behind him, and to his great surprise, the android girl said that it might work. Realizing he had no other choice, Simon walked up to the machine and sensually placed his hand on its glass. He said breathlessly that he couldn't help but notice its lights from the hallway, because the machine wasn't just full of snacks, it was unique in its own way. However, much to his regret, it didn't work, and Simon knew that if his audience saw him now, they would call him disgusting. At that moment, the door to the room they were in suddenly opened and April walked in, clapping her hands meaningfully. She asked the hero if he was always so pathetic, but Rina stood up for him, saying that she simply hadn't seen him on streams. At that moment, the girl in the military uniform was contacted on the earpiece, and she reported that the target was right in front of her, asking her not to shoot, since something was brewing there. Then she turned angrily to the protagonist again, asking him how he knew about Raoul. At this moment, the hero was at a loss. He had absolutely no idea what to answer her, and decided to turn to Rina for help. She explained that the system was linked to his brain, so perhaps some strong emotional memory could trigger the system. Then Simon started trying to recreate some emotional memory. He needed to make his heart skip a beat again. The first memory that came to his mind was the moment he reached his first 1,000,000 subscribers, and he was truly happy that day. But apparently this was not enough, and Simon began to think about what else could awaken emotions in him. Meanwhile, April asked Rina to get out of the way, but she, realizing that she was about to do something bad, covered Simon with her body. In response, April explained that she was just improvising now, and, apparently, these words seemed convincing enough to Rina, and she let her through. Then the woman approached the hero again, lifted him above the ground, and threatening him with a weapon, ordered him to tell everything he knew. The main character himself, at that moment, was frantically trying to remember something that could trigger the system and cause his emotions to explode. He remembered the birthday when Tess had surprised him, and those memories still warmed his heart. But nothing had changed. And then suddenly, the very moment when his ex-girlfriend burst into his room and announced that she was breaking up with him, came into Simon's head. This memory was so strong that even Rina herself felt something awakening inside her body. She suddenly came out of her stupor, turned around, looked at the main character, and wondered what that had just happened. She thought she felt some kind of discomfort or pain, but since she was an android, these feelings were completely new to her. At this point, the system informed the hero that his date had begun, that April was still hostile towards him, but also curious and reasonable. Then he saw 3 possible answers, but they were so cliched that he doubted they would make any difference. However, he suddenly noticed something strange in the woman's behavior. She was behaving a little differently than before. Simon noticed that April was shaking for some reason. He didn't understand what she was afraid of, since he was the only one who was under threat now. Moreover, he himself did not understand which Raoul was being talked about, but he had no options, and he decided to try to calm the girl down. Simon chose the first answer and told April that the man was out there somewhere, but she was not alone. At that moment, the girl froze. She suddenly realized that Simon knew something that he shouldn't know at all. Deciding she couldn't stand by any longer, Rina picked up a fire extinguisher and dumped its entire contents on April, who was already crossing all boundaries. After that, they, together with Simon, took advantage of the moment and ran away, and the woman did not understand how he had managed to escape from her twice already. As they walked up the stairs, Simon was surprised at how strong April was, as she almost strangled him. Then Rina asked him what memories had helped him, but the hero ignored her question, as he was very glad that they had finally reached the roof. Having opened the long-awaited door, he immediately ran to the roof, thinking that the fire escape would be in front of them any minute. But instead, he saw the blinding light of a helicopter circling directly above his head. Simon froze in place, still not fully believing that he was being hunted so thoroughly. However, he realized that Rena was also with him, so he immediately turned around and said that they needed to run immediately. But behind him, he saw April coming up the stairs, holding Rena on her shoulder, and she said that Simon had created a job for her today. However, she added that she even wanted to thank him for this, since now she would be paid for the overtime. At that moment, the main character was in indescribable horror. He believed that all of this was absolutely unfair, as if it was someone's evil joke. And suddenly, at that moment, the system notified him again about the continuation of assimilation, reporting that the progress of global data had already reached 99.9%. At that moment, Simon realized that these dating triggers were his only hope, because they had worked so far. At that moment, he had three options: kiss, take the bullet, or stick his head between her legs and kiss his ass goodbye. Quickly evaluating all these possible answers, he realized that he was finished, since April already had the gun pointed at him. All three of these answer options were simply terrible, but only one of them could not kill the protagonist instantly. At that moment, April suddenly yelled at him, asking what he was doing, and then Simon decided to apologize to her in advance. Taking advantage of her brief hesitation, he immediately rushed forward and in a moment was right next to the girl. He took her by the cheek and carefully brought her face closer to his, while the woman herself was in complete horror. However, Simon didn't stand on ceremony, and instead of saying anything, he simply leaned over and gently kissed her on the cheek. At that moment, April froze and suddenly fell silent, not knowing what to answer. Simon really hoped it would work, since there was no specification that she had to be kissed on the lips. Then he suddenly noticed that the woman was slowly lowering the pistol, and he was already glad that this simulator had actually worked. After that, April carefully placed the android girl back on the floor. Simon, meanwhile, was thinking that when they got out of here, he would definitely have to thank Rena for her help in activating the system. However, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by April, who rushed up the stairs towards him. Before the protagonist could do anything, she hit him right in the face with the glowing butt of her pistol, sending him flying backwards. Then the woman stood right above him and asked him menacingly what the hell he was thinking about. Suddenly, someone spoke to her on the radio. A man asked what had happened to Simon Knight, to which the woman replied that he had been detained, and Rena too. When the protagonist woke up, he was chained to a table in the interrogation room, and April suddenly addressed him, saying that she had hit him too hard. The hero immediately began asking where he was, where his phone was, and most importantly, where Rena was. But the woman replied that she was fine. She then showed him his own phone, noting that it had a very funny anime ringtone. When the main character looked at the screen, he saw that Piper, the same girl from the cafe where he went on dates, was calling him. The girl seemed to be very worried about Simon since he didn't answer the phone, which was completely unlike him. Meanwhile, the hero himself explained that his phone was usually on silent mode and asked April why she wasn't answering the call. The woman hung up and explained that Simon needed to answer a couple of questions, and the hero responded by asking her why everything hurt so much. And then he suddenly realized that the woman had hit him with a stun gun, and he immediately began accusing her of trying to kill him. But April replied that he was lucky that it was she who was chasing him. The fact is that she had changed the bullets to rubber ones, so his life was not in danger. Besides, Simon had suddenly kissed her, so it was stupid to ask why she had tasered him, since she wasn't the one making the rules. And at that moment, the main character suddenly began to remember what happened shortly before he passed out. He remembered kissing April on the cheek, but he knew he'd only done it because he could die. He was distracted from his thoughts by April herself, who sharply demanded that Simon explain what had happened between him and Rena. She asked the protagonist to tell her everything from the very beginning, without missing the slightest detail. Simon ended up telling her about those very trigger dates that started after meeting Rena, and about the possible responses. April asked him if he really meant that these answer options told him what to do and what to say in order to meet people. Simon explained that it sounded stupid, but she tried to kill him, and yet he was still alive, and it was all thanks to this system. The woman apparently did not believe him and was already preparing to torture him, but the protagonist frantically asked him not to kill him, assuring him that it was the truth. And then suddenly April leaned over to him, grabbed his cheeks and began to carefully examine his face. At this point, the system again gave the hero a message that his date had begun. As it turned out, April did this only to check if this system would appear in front of him again. The main character himself was horrified. He didn't even expect that he would be such easy prey and that his emotions would be awakened so easily. The woman then asked her colleagues if they had learned anything, and they said they had confirmed Rena's reaction almost simultaneously, after which they praised April for her excellent work. After this, the woman headed towards the door. The hero asked her what would happen to him, but she said that she did not know since it was not she who decided it. Finally, she decided to ask the hero if the system had said anything else about that man. Simon realized that she meant that same Raoul, but noted that the system only told her to mention his name and nothing more. Then April answered briefly and thanked the hero for the information, and then left the room. Entering Rena's room, she said that everything was just as he described, down to the smallest crazy details. As it turned out, the android girl was also held hostage and was trying her best to escape. April reassured her by saying that she had not hurt Simon, as Rena had asked her to, and then asked her why it was necessary to do all this. The android girl only replied with displeasure that it was all solely for love. She then asked if they could go since Simon had a bunch of dates to go on. But April explained that he had a billion-dollar agenda in his head. Rena replied that the corporation knew that forcibly breaking their connection would cripple them both, and she also thought that Simon would teach her what love was. The girl assumed that they would see sense in keeping him alive, and that it would be a good decision for both of them. Rena assumed that April should understand this herself, but the woman did not answer her. Instead, she turned away and thought about something of her own. When she entered the other room, a man approached her and asked whether they should close the project or rethink it as an experiment. The girl said that the project had progressed more in the last day than in the entire week she had spent with Rena, and at the moment she believed that they should continue. The man told her that everything was decided then, and if their other plans were not affected, then they should see what Simon and Rena would do next. After this, April went to the main character to free him from the handcuffs, which Simon was incredibly happy about. The girl explained that the corporation decided that he would be more useful alive than dead, so it was decided to release him. When Simon left the room, Rena was already waiting for him and immediately ran up to him. She was glad that he didn't die, which meant her simulation was working, but Simon reminded her that it was her simulation that drove him to the taser. However, he decided that he shouldn't think about it too much. He was just glad that it was over with. But April said that wasn't true at all. She explained that the corporation had decided to monitor them to advance their research, as long as the two of them remained mentally linked. After that, she gave Simon his phone, but the hero didn't know why he needed it, because he had already missed Rena's morning stream. Meanwhile, the android girl reported that Operation Dating Simulation had been launched, but the hero was still terrified that his viewing streak had been broken. At that moment, someone's hand fell on his shoulder. The unknown man said that for now, Simon would be under their protection and that they would assign him a personal bodyguard. When Simon turned around, he saw behind him a tall, menacing man in a suit with a gun, whose name was January, or Jen for short. The main character even dropped his phone from his hands due to such an unexpected meeting. The man, looking at the hero, only grinned, saying that his neck was so weak that he could break it with one hand. Simon responded with a convulsive laugh, saying that he was very pleased to meet him. When he saw the message above Jen's head about the start of a date, he realized this thing works on everyone. When they came out, the man told April that he was disappointed because the puppy would have died from the strong draft and she had not been able to finish it off. He suggested that she had become emotionally attached to him, but the woman denied this, saying that she considered it the most effective path for the mission. But Jen explained that orders were orders anyway, so they had to watch over them and protect them as best they could. However, he also added that there will come a time when Rena will decide to break ties with this Simon. Pointing to the gun, Jen explained that in that case, they wouldn't need this guy anymore. Meanwhile, it was already deep night outside, and the main character decided that after such a day, he needed to get some fresh air. As it turned out, Rena and company needed him to go on a lot of dates, preferably with as many people as possible. This all sounded troublesome to Simon, as he already had quite a few people in his life who wanted him dead. However, he still decided to try this dating thing, but warned that he was doing it exclusively for Rena's sake. Her dating sim had saved his life, and compared to that, regular dating should have been a piece of cake. Meanwhile, Piper was still upset that Simon hadn't even responded to her numerous messages. She was genuinely concerned about him, but all she got in return was ignoring him, and this guy acted as if he didn't notice her at all. Piper was clearly offended. She even paused the stream to call him when she saw that his twink wasn't responding in the chat. As it turned out, Piper was the girl hiding behind the virtual Rena, but now she was only concerned about why Simon wasn't answering her. Soon morning came, and the first thing the protagonist saw when he opened his eyes was Rena's worried face. At that moment, he even began to think that all of this really wasn't a dream, but actually happened in reality. The girl immediately grabbed his cheeks and began to stretch them in different directions, thereby proving that this was really not a dream. Simon explained that you don't need to pinch people to wake them up, it was just a saying. But Rena said they should start doing it because it was the most effective way. At first she wanted to do it differently, but Simon hugged his pillow so sweetly, and the girl on it looked so much like her, although Rena herself never made such a face. When he saw that the android girl had found his secret pillow with the image of the streamer, he immediately pushed her out the door of his room. When he was finally alone, he was finally able to exhale, recovering from such a stressful day. When Simon went into the kitchen, he saw April there, who was clearly unhappy that Rena found that dirty dakimakura. But the hero explained that it was just a decorative pillow. At that moment, he suddenly noticed that the girls had cleaned up his kitchen, and now it was impossible to even say that he had almost been killed in his own home. April explained that this is how their department works. They leave no traces, no trash, no evidence, no corpses. But the hero asked not to talk about corpses so casually. Hearing this, Jen placed a stack of papers in front of him and said that if corpses disgusted him, then he should avoid lectures 25 through 32. He declared that this was his life now, with curfews, signals, code names, and so on. Wake up at exactly 5 o'clock in the morning and lights out at 8 o'clock in the evening. However, Simon was clearly unhappy that they had turned his apartment into a prison, but Jen responded by stating that he was now under his supervision, which was standard procedure. Simon immediately began explaining to him that in the last 24 hours he had been shot, electrocuted, and had a dating simulator installed directly into his brain, and none of this was standard. While the men were actively arguing among themselves, Rena was rummaging through the papers and suddenly found something interesting. It stated that the protocol should be followed at home and in essential places such as educational institutions or workplaces. So the girl came to the conclusion that if they needed more freedom, then they just needed to start a plan for his rehabilitation, which meant Simon needed to find a job. In the end, the hero followed her advice and went to the interview, but the manager clearly had questions for him. She noted that in his resume, he says he dropped out of school to pursue content creation. At this point, the hero became nervous and his dating system activated again, offering him 3 possible answers. He decided that he should say that he was also something of a celebrity and perhaps even considered an entrepreneur, since he even had his own brand of energy supplements. However, the woman asked him whether he really believed that his only work experience entitled him to a leadership position. At this moment, the protagonist realized that the idea of getting a job had completely failed. When he went outside, Rena immediately ran up to him with questions, but Simon explained that they were asking too much of him. The girl immediately began to encourage him, saying that they would definitely find something, and this would be the first step towards returning his fame. She then added that if they didn't find anything, he could just start streaming again, which encouraged the protagonist a little. However, to be honest, he didn't entirely like the idea. Just when he was thinking about continuing to stream, his memories took him back to a couple of months ago. He thought back to the moment he broke up with his ex-girlfriend and how he started getting bullied online, so he knew it wouldn't be easy to get back into streaming. Noticing his puzzled expression, Rena turned to him and asked what was going on. But the hero immediately pretended that everything was fine and said that they would definitely find something, because he was, after all, Simon Knight. Although he noted that it would have been much easier if Jen, who constantly followed him, did not have such high standards. The man explained that employment meant he would be spending a lot of time outside the apartment, and if that didn't help their operations, he wouldn't allow it. Besides, Simon was bad at it, and he couldn't make things that complicated. However, he then suddenly paused to spit out the disgusting coffee he had bought from a nearby coffee shop. After this short verbal skirmish, our heroes set off again to search for a suitable job for Simon. When they arrived for their next interview, Jen immediately noted that he didn't like one of the corners, because if a sniper hid there, Simon would definitely die. They then went to another place, but Jen didn't like the fact that there was no dental insurance there. Simon was incredibly angry about all this. He didn't understand why April had to be busy this afternoon, because he would have preferred her as a nanny than this ice cube. Jen stated that his skills were being wasted on babysitting a beautiful tin can and her pet slug. However, Rena decided to put an end to their argument and said that they needed to hurry to the cat cafe for another interview, and the hero was happy because he really loved cats. But soon, having returned home, he realized that this love was clearly not mutual, although he almost got the job. Everything was fine until he made his boss's favorite cat hate him, and Simon had no idea that the cat would be such a prude. The hero complained that it was all unfair because he had millions of subscribers, and now he was essentially a nobody. However, he still hoped that even if these subscribers were already a thing of the past, it should at least mean something. But Simon quickly realized that even the magnificent sight of his favorite spicy noodles did not lift his spirits. At this rate, he would have to ask his sister for money again, and then he asked Jen if the corporation could do anything, because the situation was becoming critical. He replied that from their point of view, Simon owed them something, and they had already entrusted him with his protection. But they did not intend to give him any more handouts. When the main character heard the word handout, a brilliant idea suddenly came to his mind. He immediately headed towards the cafe where he took girls on dates and called out to Piper, who was standing with Eli. The protagonist fell to the girl's knees and said how great she looked in her work clothes. Since Piper was eager to spend time with Simon, she approached Eli saying that they had some unsold baked goods that they wanted to throw out. At that moment, the man froze, realizing what his employee was hinting at. He eventually gave them the keys, but asked them to wipe down the counters and lock the front door when they were done. Soon, the guys sat down at the table and began to eat croissants, and the hero told Piper that he was looking for a job, but so far everything had been completely unsuccessful. Piper started to laugh at him, saying that she still couldn't believe that a famous streamer was looking for a job for minimum wage. She even jokingly suggested that perhaps he would have had a lot more money if he hadn't spent it on YouTubers. But Simon was quick to assure her that this would never happen. At this moment, the boys laughed loudly. The girl asked him if he was really that bad with money at home, but Simon said that he could easily survive. It was just that things had been going crazy lately. Then the girl asked him if he wanted to talk about it, and the protagonist did, but he didn't know where to start. He noted that no one had told him that job hunting was so exhausting, and he had no idea what it was like to actually work, so he admired Piper. The girl said that they all have a goal that they are working towards, and that helps a lot, and Simon noted that they kind of fake it until they make it. However, Piper didn't really like his words, so she decided to take the crumbs she was wiping off the table and throw them sharply in his face. The girl said that what she was feeling now was very real, for example, her fatigue, and so she asked Simon to finally get up from the couch. Looking at his hair, she said that she should use his head as a duster, but Simon only replied that she would have to sweep it all up anyway. However, the girl said that she might not have to do that, and then asked if he was really serious about the job. She poked the protagonist with her finger and asked if he was really ready to work. Piper said Eli always says they need help but is always whining about the hiring process, but they were willing to take Simon on without any problem. And although it was not a leadership position, the main character was very grateful to the girl for helping him. He even burst into tears of happiness, realizing that if he had gone to another interview, he would have simply gone crazy from all of this. Piper simply replied that it would just be a trial period, but judging by Simon's reaction, he was very desperate. Then the hero said that now he needed to agree on this with one boar, and he just appeared right behind him, saying that it suited them. Jen clarified that the management's willingness to cooperate remains to be seen, but they will test this during the trial period. The girl suddenly recoiled and asked Simon who it was, but the hero hastened to assure her that everything was fine. The man quickly introduced himself as Simon's life coach, and Simon played along, saying he needed to get back into shape for streaming, and this guy was very involved in the process. Piper said she could understand why he needed a life coach, and then asked Simon if he could come by at 10 a.m. the following morning. Without waiting for the protagonist's answer, Jen slapped him on the cheek and said that he would definitely come. The next morning, the hero actually showed up at his new job, and the girl said she would fill him in on the situation, and also added that she shouldn't see any of Rena's streams at work. And even though Simon said he wouldn't watch them, Piper understood that actions sometimes speak louder than words. Then the girl said that if he kept everything related to Rena away from work, then maybe she would let him watch the stream during his break. And at that moment, a female voice was heard right behind her. It was the android girl who had come to greet Simon. She congratulated him on getting the job, saying that she had always believed in him, and the hero himself was also very happy about it. The girl then introduced herself as Rena, saying that she was helping Simon get his life together, and he noted that she looked exactly like his favorite VTuber. At that moment, Piper froze in horror, looking at an exact copy of her virtual personality that no one knew about. Looking at the android girl, she realized that right in front of her was her intellectual property. Soon we were transported to another place, in the midst of a quarrel between a man and a young girl who told him that they were breaking up. Finally, she threw him some photos of his wife, saying that perhaps she would like to exchange a few words with him, since spouses usually treat infidels poorly. However, the girl also stated that she was sure that his wife would have found out about his adventures anyway. It certainly wouldn't have remained a secret, since everyone else had known about it for a long time. Soon, it was all over the news that millionaire Congressman Mitchell Ball had been caught cheating on his wife with his mistress. The mistress herself was pleased. All his accounts were cleared, his personal data was copied, and no fingerprints were left, meaning she would definitely be praised for this work. The breakup had hurt her a little, but luckily the guy had turned out to be an unfaithful jerk, so she was just going to cry into her pillow for a couple of days before bed. Moreover, the girl quickly found someone else, a streamer who played a dating simulator every day. He seemed to her like a person who was no worse than herself, and that is why she decided to find out more about him. Meanwhile, Piper was terrified, but she knew she needed to calm down and deal with this with a cool head. She decided that the best thing to do now was to simply take things slowly. Looking at Rena, she thought that this girl was probably just a good cosplayer, and now she just dressed up as her favorite VTuber Simon. In other words, she dressed up as Piper's own virtual personality. However, she even behaved frighteningly similar to the image she shows on her streams, and her name was also Rena. Then the girl decided to come to her senses and patted herself on the cheeks, deciding that she would think about this after work. Meanwhile, Simon wiped the table and said that now you can eat directly from it, to which the girl sarcastically noted that this is what tables are for. She then told him to prepare for a crash course since her training was starting right now. And although the protagonist was very glad that they would get down to business faster, he asked Piper to wait a second. Wearing glasses and a fake mustache, he said he couldn't afford to be recognized too often at work, so he would go undercover. Soon after, they began training, and some things turned out to be quite difficult for the protagonist. Rena followed them every now and then and watched every action of the main character, which began to irritate Piper a little. To bring Simon back to his senses a little, she deliberately adjusted the coffee machine so that the steam would gush straight into his face. Soon, customers began to come to them, and the main character took on the position of cashier. After that, Piper directed him to the toilet, since their worker had to be able to do everything, including cleaning toilets. Meanwhile, Jen sat at one of the tables and, without taking his eyes off, watched what Simon was doing. The hero soon reported that he couldn't handle the strain, and Piper only noted with a grin that he lasted almost 2 full hours, which was 2 hours longer than she expected. At this point, Rena intervened in their conversation, saying that while Simon was resting, she could help with something. Then the girl looked at her a little slyly and said that she had just the perfect job for her. She ended up giving the android girl a homemade advertisement and sending her out to solicit customers on the street. Meanwhile, Piper herself returned to Simon and offered him a cup of coffee, saying that it was one of the perks of their job. She noted that she was surprised that he accepted her offer, and, apparently, his life coach took his upbringing seriously, and he himself did not even realize to what extent. Piper remarked that the girl, Rena, seemed nice to her, and Simon explained that she was also something of a coach, and at the very least, she certainly gave him motivation. Then the girl began to carefully ask him about this strange stranger, and Simon said that she really was a cosplayer, and that this was part of her gimmick. He added that she is currently a fan of Rena, so she will probably look and act like this for some time. Piper noted with displeasure that she actually looked like a VTuber come to life, except for her personality. She noted to herself that she almost thought it was an unlicensed cosplay kit, just like those damn Dakimakura. She was lost in thought and didn't even notice how she touched the protagonist's hand when she handed him a clean plate. The hero looked tense. He didn't want to stain the plate, but the girl reassured him, saying that they were wearing gloves anyway. Simon was glad that the dating sim didn't activate, even though he was nervous, and it was a real relief to him. At that moment, they suddenly heard Rena's voice, who told them that she had great news. Leading a whole crowd of new clients, she said that, it turns out, she's very good at holding signs. Piper had been really hoping for a break, but now, looking at all the clients who wanted a photo with Rena, she realized that she wouldn't get a break. But on the other hand, the girl understood that the more clients they had, the more tips they would get. So the news was great. But nevertheless, something about all of this incredibly irritated her. But she couldn't even formulate what exactly she didn't like. Meanwhile, Jen was still sitting at one of the tables, but now the situation had changed, as there were a lot of people around. Judging by the furious expression on his face, he clearly didn't like all of this. Then Piper told Simon to stand behind the cash register while she prepared the orders, and although Simon wasn't sure how to work the thing, she insisted. The first customer ordered a cold brew with half caffeine, medium brown sugar, maximum cream, a quarter almond milk, a quarter whole milk, and half oat milk. However, the protagonist realized that this thing was pointless. There was no screen at the checkout, but there were a lot of buttons, and then Piper told him to just write down the order on paper. At this point, more and more customers began to approach the checkout, and the main character simply could not cope with such an influx of people. However, What bothered him most was not the clients themselves, but Jen, who was sitting opposite him and did not take his eyes off him. Simon had already cursed himself 1,000 times for having decided to look for a job at all. Now he realized that he was absolutely not cut out for this. Piper also understood that he couldn't cope. Such an influx of clients was too huge for the first day of work, so she approached the hero and told him to take a break. But they were suddenly interrupted by Rena, who said that now was not the time to give up. She said Simon never gave up when he speedran the game, never let go of his sword when he couldn't pass a Souls-like, and never lowered the difficulty. She also reminded him of the 24-hour stream he was able to do. Simon noted that technically he did, but he disconnected in the final hours. Then Rena reminded him of the time he spent $300 to have a fling with a girl, but Simon asked her not to continue. He exhaled and declared that he was fine, after which he added that he would definitely cope. He said that they would do it manually. He himself would record the orders, and he asked Rena to calculate how much the clients owed them. At that moment, Piper smiled, because she thought that she had just seen the old Simon whom she had already missed. However, it was strange for her to see Rena next to him like this. It felt as if she was the one encouraging him, and these words were coming from her lips. Then the girl decided that she, too, could not retreat, and with renewed vigor she set to work. Soon evening came, and the last customers had already left the coffee shop. The tired workers leaned against the countertop, and Piper noted that it was tough even for her, which is why it's so important to master the cash register first. Then Rena approached her, saying that it was cool, and offered to help tomorrow. But Piper said that at this stage she was practically a full-time employee. She then reminded the boys that they needed to fill out some paperwork, to which the android girl said that she had always dreamed of paying taxes. Simon asked her if every shift would be like this, but Rena wasn't sure about it, since she had never worked before. But today, she was definitely having fun. Moreover, no one recognized Simon. No one would even have thought that Simon Knight himself would be serving coffee to ordinary people. On the one hand, the hero was happy about this, but on the other hand, it would be nice if at least one person recognized him. And at that moment, someone suddenly asked if this was Simon Knight. Hearing this, the main character decided to admit that it was indeed him, after which he asked the next customer what he wanted to order. His client turned out to be a young girl with black and red hair, who looked at him with a sly look. As it turned out, this was the same congressman's mistress who had recently made a splash in the news. With a sly smile, she stated that she would like to receive several things from Simon. Meanwhile, April watched everything that was happening through the cameras. She saw the girl approach the cash register where Simon was standing, and she knew he would want to know why there were so many precautions. The man told her that he would only ask if he knew they were accepting them at all, after which he said that the crowd had thinned out and she needed to go back. Then April said that she was already heading to the right place, while Simon continued to service the girl. She asked him to make a larger order, and the hero noted that this was just his favorite morning order. The girl said with a smile that she thought she was the only one like her in the whole wide world. But the hero replied that he was pleased that his fan had such impeccable taste. He asked her to sign the check, but she said they shouldn't stop there and asked what he did after work. She noted that he would be free in an hour and had no plans, and added that she was willing to bet that they would find much more in common together. However, the hero did not expect such a rapid development of events, so he looked anxiously at Rena, silently asking her for help. She understood it completely differently. She thought that a good flirtation was brewing between this couple, and her eyes immediately lit up with delight. The stranger told Simon that he could use a wardrobe update and added that she could help with it, and the hero immediately noted to himself that she was clearly a red flag. He didn't understand how she knew that he had been wearing the same clothes lately, since he was currently wearing his work uniform. At this point, the system reported that a date with her had begun, and the girl's status showed that she was infatuated, obsessed, and also striving for protection and determination. Seeing this, Rena became even more delighted, realizing that it really was flirting. But then Piper intervened in the conversation, saying that it wasn't flirting at all, and then pushing the intrusive girl away with a slap of her hand. She stood up for the main character, telling her not to touch him. Piper threatened to call the police right now if she didn't leave. At this point, the stranger became truly angry. A cut appeared on her arm from Piper's blow, and this made her furious. She was extremely unhappy that this insignificant waitress was trying to come between them. She even walked up and roughly grabbed Piper by the apron, angrily calling her a homewrecker. Piper then explained that they reserve the right to refuse service to any customer, after which she once again told the girl to get out of there. At that moment, Someone suddenly turned to the stranger, and she turned around sharply, asking what this insignificant worm needed. It turned out it was Jen. He told her to do as Piper said, and that was her first and last warning. The girl understood that she was now in a losing situation, and she had no choice but to give in. She headed for the exit, but threatened to leave them a bad review and write the whole truth about their home-wrecking barista. At the door, she bumped into April, who accidentally pushed her, and the girl immediately began to swear at her without having time to see who was in front of her. However, when she saw a familiar face, she suddenly fell silent and froze in place. April looked at her reproachfully, but said nothing either. Finally, the stranger again called them all worms, after which she finally headed for the door. The only one she said goodbye to properly was Simon. She didn't include him on the list of worms. After she left, Simon thanked Piper for saving him, to which she said they needed to work on his customer service skills. At that moment, April turned to Jen, asking why the girl was there, and he said that it was exactly what she thought it was. Then she asked Simon and Rena if everything was okay with them. At that moment, they were discussing the fact that this stranger wrote her number and even left a heart. April then turned to Piper, saying that they would appreciate what she had done for Simon, and then added that the girl could just call her by her first name. The surprised girl looked at April and said that she was very pleased to meet her, silently noting how formidable she looked. She then decided to ask Simon who she was, and he noted that she was another life coach, as he needed a lot of guidance in life. As she headed for the door, she said she was just stopping by, but that she, Simon, and Rena needed to talk, and suggested meeting at the park a couple of blocks away. When she was leaving, she noticed that the door handle was very badly dented. When the shift finally ended, Piper remarked that they had never experienced such chaos, and apparently, they had Rena to thank for that. She then asked who these life coaches were, to which Simon replied that they were highly rated and were something like celebrities. At this point, Piper noticed that he couldn't untie his apron. She explained to him how to do it, but Simon still couldn't do it. Without thinking twice, the girl walked up to him, put his hands behind his back and helped him untie his apron, although it all looked as if she simply decided to hug him. She said in a soft voice that he really did need to be shown everything. At that moment, she seemed to freeze and enjoyed every moment she spent next to Simon. And then suddenly Piper noticed that Rena was sitting right behind them, carefully watching everything that was happening. There was an awkward pause between the girls. Piper clearly didn't want this cosplayer watching them. Therefore, she tried to untie the main character's apron as quickly as possible and move away from him. She said it was quite simple. She untied his apron without even looking at him, although the hero himself did not believe her, saying that she had definitely looked at the knot. Piper said that he could think that as long as he slept soundly, and then Rena mentioned that he definitely slept soundly with that hug pillow. An awkward conversation ensued between the boys, as the protagonist clearly didn't want Piper to know about the pillow. At that moment, the boys didn't even suspect that someone was watching them using a hidden camera. Soon after, Rena and Simon went to the park, and the hero was very unhappy that he had gone from being a streamer to being unemployed, and then to a worthless cashier. He understood that there would be an incredible amount of work here, but everything turned out not to be as bad as before. At that moment, Piper texted him, praising him for his excellent work and telling him to be on time tomorrow, otherwise she would be cleaning toilets. At that moment, April approached them with 2 ice cream cones in her hands, saying that it wasn't the worst day she had seen, and even Jen hadn't yet rejected his new job. Simon confirmed that things weren't really that bad until that last client showed up, and then April decided to talk about her. She said that he needed to be more careful, but Simon didn't understand what she was talking about because April herself was looking after him, as well as this Ice King. But the girl explained that seriously, his connection with Rena stopped the corporation from killing him on the spot. But that didn't mean he was safe. Moreover, she decided to ask him if he really had that same date again, and the hero admitted it. He said it was because of that crazy girl who came to them at the end of the shift. However, April didn't let him finish, as she sensed danger and immediately threw both boys to the ground, telling them to duck. After that, she immediately took 2 smoke grenades out of her pocket and threw them towards the enemy. As soon as the smoke enveloped them, she ordered the boys to be quiet, as they had guests. A girl approached them with armed men, shouting that she needed this guy alive, and ordered the soldiers to stop aiming at the head. At that moment, the protagonist froze in horror, as the stranger's voice seemed strangely familiar to him. As soon as the smoke cleared a little, he saw that crazy client again. Simon was horrified, not believing that he was so popular that girls were ready to do such a thing for him. Then April said that this girl was acting faster than she expected, so she asked the guys to duck again. The stranger herself said that if the soldiers didn't scare Simon, they certainly scared little April, and noted that her gadgets were very annoying. At that moment, one of the soldiers addressed her as ma'am, and this made the girl very angry. She grabbed him by the throat and told him not to address her like that anymore. She lifted the soldier high above the ground until he began to choke, and loudly declared that she was only 25 years old. At that moment, Simon was horrified. He did not understand where this petite girl got so much strength from. He then asked April if she was going to do anything since she was his bodyguard, to which she said that they needed to find shelter first and asked him to follow her. Their heroes had no choice but to carefully crawl along the grass after the woman. While the stranger was trying to find the main character, she noted that they needed to take everything that stood between Simon and her. The hero didn't understand why he needed to do this, since he had just met her that very day, and Rena assumed that it was that legendary love at first sight. April explained that knowing this girl, it was probably love at first sight, after which the hero asked if she really knew this stalker. The girl explained that she did know her, and since she knew her style, she understood that his friend Piper could be in trouble. These words greatly alarmed the hero, and he asked to call Jen so that he could check on her and, if anything, help. But April said that they were not her bodyguards. She explained that as long as their lives were not in danger, they should not interfere with the affairs of other calendar agents. After that, she ran away and asked him to wait for her, but the hero immediately began to stop her, asking what kind of calendar agents these were. At that moment, he suddenly heard a stranger approaching him and calling his name. She decided to take a different approach, saying that they had simply started off on the wrong note and that they should start from scratch. The girl said that he could call her February or just Febby, after which she added that she just wanted to talk and get to know him better. With a maniacal smile, she added that, after all, the reward for his heart was very much her style, much nicer than the usual dirty murders. Febby assumed that January and April had already told Simon everything, adding that the corporation was very busy with the little G1-RL. They were told they had to seduce Simon Knight, and the reward for doing so was the sexiest thing Febby had ever seen. Even the corporation's competitors couldn't make such offers to their killers. They didn't care whether the android was destroyed or died. The main thing was to get their hands on its technology. However, Febby admitted that she never worked for the prizes. There was a real connection between them, as if they were made for each other. At that moment, Simon began to realize that there was a price on his heart, and April and Jen were hiding it. But Rena was sure they had a good reason. However, Simon grabbed her hand sharply, saying that he didn't care at all what April said. After that, he dragged the girl away, saying that now they needed to take care of themselves first. But before he had run even a few meters, Febby jumped out of the smoke at him, clearly pleased that she had finally found him. She immediately hugged Simon and held him close, saying that she had finally caught him. The girl pressed herself so tightly against his chest that it began to incredibly irritate the main character. This overabundance of emotions reactivated the date and offered 3 possible responses: to be less strict, to hug back, or to relax and let it happen. Simon noted to himself that this girl had a grip of steel, and Febby herself said that now that she had caught him, she would definitely not let him go. But at that moment, Rena intervened in their idyll. She began to pull him towards herself and asked him to quickly choose one of the options. At that moment, Febby asked them to wait a little longer because only then would they be together forever. But it was not meant to be, as their embrace was interrupted by April's sudden appearance. She picked up her glowing energy butt and hit Febby right on the cheek, causing the girl to instantly fly away from Simon. Taking advantage of the moment, April grabbed the protagonist by the clothes and ordered him and Rena to run after her. After a while, Febby finally came to her senses. She touched the cheek where the blow fell and was clearly unhappy that someone had come between them again. And at that moment, a diabolical plan began to mature in her head. Febby declared that if Simon couldn't be hers alone, then she would simply get rid of everyone else, starting with that annoying girl. Meanwhile, our heroes tried to escape from danger, making their way through endless clouds of smoke. However, at some point they came across one of the soldiers who came with Febby. Without thinking twice, April picked up her weapon again and jumped straight at him from above, out of the cloud of smoke. In an instant, she appeared in front of the soldier and kicked him in the head, and confused, he began to shoot wildly in different directions. The soldier was soon defeated, and then April turned to Rena, asking if she had seen any good hiding places nearby. The girl said that she could suggest a Ferris wheel nearby. Moreover, it would be a lot of fun to ride there. And without thinking twice, the woman agreed. They soon arrived at the attraction. But Simon said that he didn't know how to trust April now, since she didn't tell him that these killers wanted to seduce him, or worse, kill him. He even suggested that she herself was also trying to seduce him, and then was going to kill him, and then she would be able to take the entire reward for herself. However, April didn't answer him, and when Simon looked at her, he realized that she didn't look very well. He also ran up to her together with Rena, and they began to ask if everything was okay with her. As it turned out, April was wounded by a bullet during the fight, but she claimed that she was fine and that it was just a scratch. And yet the main character was very surprised that she had been hiding her wound all this time. He remembered that when the soldiers started shooting in all directions, he most likely hit the woman right in the side. At that moment, emotions overwhelmed him again, and thus the date with April was reactivated. He had three options: take a breath and listen to her, hug April and die with her, or take the gun from her and start showing off. Of all these options, only the first one was adequate, so Simon turned to the girl and asked her to simply be honest with him. He asked directly who the calendar agents were and what they wanted from him. At first, April remained silent because it was classified information and she was hesitant to share it so easily. But since Simon was directly involved in all of this, she decided to tell him all the information. She explained that the calendar is one of many divisions of the corporation. These are former mercenaries and the like, some more eccentric than others. She said these people were the best of the best in their field. Those who reach the top in their specialty become one of the months of the calendar. She was also among them, just like January and February. April also explained that the corporation ordered Jen and her to protect the protagonist and Rena. They then motivated all the calendar agents to seduce Simon to test the limits of his connection with their android. The hero, having heard this, sighed wearily, realizing that Rena would still send him on dates. But now he was followed by many creepy, powerful agents. He himself was not an agent or an assassin, but he understood what was happening. He was a part of it, just like Rena, so they deserved to know what awaited them. And whether they liked it or not, they had to figure it out together, and the android girl saw it as a real-life streaming collaboration. Hearing this, April chuckled, realizing that it was no wonder why Rena was so in love with him. Then she said that since they were being frank, she should point out that the rewards for him were very tempting, but she herself was hunting for something else. When Simon suggested that she was hunting for information about that very Raoul, the girl suddenly froze, not understanding how he knew this. However, the hero asked not to underestimate him, since dating triggers only reveal this name in the case of April. He himself wished he could help her more, but triggering dating was one thing, but he didn't think he could control what people told him. However, April said that they would talk about all these backstories later, after which she pushed the guys into the Ferris wheel cabin. She herself remained below and began to turn on the mechanism, saying that if they were safe, then she would be able to give it her all. After this, the Ferris wheel began to rotate slowly and the heroes began to rise up. Finally, April asked Simon if he trusted her, and the dating system again offered him three answer options. He chose the second option, saying that he trusted her, but asked her not to die, as that would definitely be the end for them. Rena noted that he did not finish the sentence, but the hero asked her to be quieter. Once they were high enough, the girl turned around and focused on her enemies. Meanwhile, Simon was genuinely worried about her, but Rena said she trusted her simulation. However, what was much more important was that she trusted April herself, as she was an unrivaled warrior. At the right moment, she used several smoke grenades to disorient the three soldiers who were blocking her passage through the park. Rena immediately asked Simon to look out the window and appreciate the view from there. The view was indeed good. They could watch the city from a bird's-eye view while the fighting raged on between April and the soldiers below. Simon noted that everything was just fine, but those terrible sounds below them spoiled everything a little. And then he suddenly remembered that he should have warned Piper, because if there was even a chance that Phoebe was hunting her, she should know about it. Simon immediately started video calling his friend, but to his surprise, for some reason she didn't answer. But eventually she suddenly picked up the phone, and Simon immediately asked if she was okay. But the next second he was horrified because he heard a familiar voice from the speaker that did not belong to Piper. When he looked at the screen, he saw that Piper was tied to a chair, and Phoebe was sitting on top of her, and she answered the hero's call. The girl said that she had enough running around in this relationship, and now it was Simon's turn. They were in a room, the code to which April knew, and she called the hero to come to them. After that, she said goodbye to the hero lover and reminded him that he needed to come alone and not take this tin can with him, since she was already tired of these homewreckers. At this moment, the heroes had already gone downstairs, where they were met by April, who had already dealt with all the soldiers. But the hero immediately rushed to her in panic, saying that Phoebe took Piper to some room and said that April would understand what she meant. At that moment, the girl suddenly froze and began to think about what kind of room this could be. She was clearly upset that Febby had managed to get to Piper, but at the same time, she knew that she couldn't have gone far and was definitely in that very place. The girl explained that this room was located in a large office of a pharmaceutical company. It was half an hour's walk from here and 10 minutes by car. And although the heroes thought the calendar had supercars or helicopters, they ended up having to call an Uber. So all three of them sat in the back seats of the car, feeling extremely uncomfortable. Then the hero decided to ask April who this February was and what she wanted from Piper. The woman explained that Febby wanted Simon specifically, and Piper was just bait, and her specialty was espionage, gathering information and disguise. To make it clearer to Simon what she was talking about, she said that it could be called cosplay. She showed him Febby's account and said that Simon himself was following her, and at that moment the hero actually remembered her. April explained that most of the calendar agents were unique, to say the least, but she and Jen were the most normal of them all. The thing is, when Febby finds a new goal, she becomes literally obsessed, and this is not a game for her, it's all for real. So if someone gets between her and her goal, it always ends badly. It wasn't just about affection. All of her emotions were literally cranked up to the max, and everything she could do or feel was felt tenfold. Because of this, even her physical strength is literally off the charts, and all this is thanks to that very room. However, Simon didn't understand how they would fight Febby given April's injury, but suggested that Jen could come and help them somehow. However, April said that if he came, he would just watch as she led him and Rena straight to Febby, just like she wanted, and then he would suspect something. But Simon insisted, because Piper had been kidnapped, and she was his boss at a job that Jen himself approved of. In response, the woman said that the Bureau's job was to protect only Simon and Rena, and the same applied to herself. However, April explained that there was something else that was more important to her than any work. She wanted to find her brother, that same Raoul. Rena's dating triggers were the first clues she'd had in a long time. This simulation seemed to know something about him, and without the two of them, April might have lost track, possibly forever. So she said she couldn't promise anything, but she would tell them everything she knew, and she hoped that would be enough to show that she was acting in their interests. At this moment, the main character was at a loss, completely unsure what to answer. And then the driver intervened in their conversation. He suddenly said a phrase about how he was being trusted with a wonderful secret. He explained that it was written on his fortune cookie, and then told Simon that it really was a wonderful secret. Then Rena turned to the hero, saying that she was right when she said that April was really on their side. Simon finally decided to trust her and asked what they should do in that case. He was ready to accept any help she was willing to offer. Meanwhile, Febby was already impatiently waiting for the main character. Turning to Piper, she said that she played her role of the homewrecker perfectly and asked not to blame her, because in war and in love, all is fair. As soon as the tape was removed from Piper's mouth, she immediately began accusing Febby of being a psychopath and demanding to know what was going on. But the girl only said that Piper shouldn't be so rude, after which she explained that they were in a decommissioned corporate laboratory. They did a lot of shady stuff in this place, like various experiments on people, and the device that was left here could be used for neurosurgery. However, Febby didn't know how it worked, but she suggested just pulling the levers and seeing what happened. Piper couldn't believe that her evil plan was to kidnap her and threaten her with that doctor thing for no reason. In response, Febby laughed, saying that Simon was really good at keeping his secrets, although she didn't blame him. After all, no one would have believed that story about an android. However, all this seemed like some kind of absurd absurdity to Piper. But Febby continued, saying that if she could only figure out who was behind this VTuber that Simon loved so much, it wouldn't be Piper sitting in that chair. At that moment, the girl began to realize that Rena was a real android. It was not just a cosplay of her model, but she did not understand why she chose her VTuber. Febby said that in any case, she needed to use Piper so that Simon wouldn't get scared, and as soon as they were alone, he would definitely agree with her. She furiously declared that his connection with this tin can would be broken and his heart would belong to her. Piper then approached her, saying that she still didn't quite understand the lore she had just loaded her with. However, before Febby could continue, Piper pointed out that she and Simon were not in the relationship she might have thought. The girl even noted that it was unlikely that they would ever be able to be in such a relationship. However, Piper knew for sure that Simon would never fall for such a crazy psyche as Febby. In response, the girl laughed constantly, saying that every person has their own problems, and it is these problems that make her and Simon so similar. Meanwhile, our heroes arrived at the right place. Rena noted that this building was incredibly tall. It must be a huge corporation. April said that if she went with the hero, it could end badly for the hostage, so she would prepare for the worst-case scenario, but it would take her time. Soon after, Simon and Rena went inside, remembering April's words that if he could get Piper out without getting hurt, that would be great. Dating triggers had gotten him this far, and now he just needed to take care of himself and Rena. At that moment, the protagonist touched the handle of the door behind which Phoebe and Piper were presumably located. As soon as he opened it, he saw a tearful Phoebe, who was very glad that he finally came, since she was already starting to think that he had stood her up. She said he walked just long enough for her to get everything ready, then asked Simon to sit at the table. He asked Phoebe if she would be jealous if Rena sat next to him, but the girl said that she was not so petty as to be jealous of a talking doll. Their date began, but as it turned out, something was bothering Phoebe, and Simon could offer her a divorce, pretend that he didn't care, or praise her cooking. The protagonist decided that the second option would be suitable, and as soon as they started eating, Phoebe said that they had a lot to discuss, such as their hobbies and plans for the future. However, Simon, with a gloomy expression on his face, replied that he did not remember asking Phoebe about this. He asked about Piper's current location, and this reaction made the girl very nervous. She started laughing convulsively and said that talking about another girl on a date was very bad form. But Simon said he would have enjoyed their meeting more if he knew Piper was safe, and that was important for his peace of mind. Then Phoebe noted with displeasure that everything was fine with her, but she did not understand what he saw in her, and hoped that this machine would help her figure it out. At that moment, the unfortunate barista sat strapped to a strange neurosurgical machine. And then suddenly Phoebe screamed at Simon, telling him to stop looking at the other woman. The protagonist noted that everything was going well until Phoebe took her eyes off him, and Rena could continue her rescue plan. While Phoebe continued to shout about how they had so much in common, the android girl quietly approached Piper. Phoebe said that usually when she seduces a target, she has to change a lot, changing her interests, emotions, and behavior. However, she felt that Simon was literally a copy of her. He did everything to keep people's attention and prove his worth. At that moment, Simon really thought about her words and whether he really was that narcissistic. While Phoebe was talking about how she constantly watched his streams, Rena had already approached Piper and began to carefully untie her. Phoebe continued, saying that Simon did everything he could to stay neat and likable. She explained that they want the same thing, to be valued, wanted, and noticed, to be who others want them to be. This is what attracted Phoebe, so she said that whatever love he wanted in return, she would definitely be able to adapt to him. But at that moment, Rena entered their conversation and said that Simon was not like that at all now, and this made Phoebe very angry. But despite the girl's extremely negative reaction, Rena continued to stand her ground. With confidence in her voice, she stated that Simon was now completely different from what Phoebe thought of him. She agreed that he is indeed quick to follow trends and sometimes seeks attention in shameful ways. However, Rena stated that Simon never did it for attention. Ultimately, people watched him because he was himself. At this point, Simon decided they needed to end the stealth and decided to just grab Piper and run. However, when he walked towards the girl, a huge table suddenly flew in front of him, which almost knocked him off his feet. The table flew across the room, then broke the window and flew outside. At that moment, the protagonist heard Phoebe's voice, who was clearly unhappy that he still wasn't looking at her. Grabbing Piper by the hair, she asked him if he really found her so disgusting that he thought there was something wrong with her. At this moment, Piper was in a terrible situation. The girl was holding her by the neck so tightly that she could not breathe. Then Phoebe lifted her off the ground, asking Simon what this girl had that she didn't, and then Simon suggested they discuss it calmly. But Phoebe did not calm down. She just wanted Simon to be only hers, and she was convinced that he was created exclusively for her. At that moment, the hero realized that he had no other choice, so he reactivated his date with the psychopath, knowing he needed to distract her from Piper. He had 3 options: strip and beg for forgiveness, take a leap of faith, or pretend he didn't care about Piper. Having decided that option number 2 would be the best, the hero turned to Phoebe, asking why she thought the depth of his soul was so shallow. In an ingratiating voice, he began to say that he was obliged to compare her divine beauty with this barista in order to admire her even more. He stated that he now clearly saw that they were truly made for each other, and these words clearly made an impression on Phoebe. Simon then asked her what she thought about it and whether she thought they could overcome their enmity and become lovers. At that moment, the girl's eyes sparkled with delight. She was glad that Simon finally understood what she was talking about. Now she didn't care about Piper at all, and so she unclenched her hand, letting go of her. However, the protagonist did not take into account that they were standing on the edge of the building, and as soon as Piper was released, she began to fall backwards. In an instant, she fell out of the window and flew down from the skyscraper. Without thinking twice, the main character abandoned Febby and ran after his friend. Without a second's hesitation, he jumped out the window after Piper, intending to catch her. He grabbed the girl, hugged her tightly and pressed her to himself, and they flew down together, and Simon thought that it was very original. However, now he understood the situation he had just found himself in. Then they both screamed in horror, realizing that everything had gone wrong and that they were about to crash onto the asphalt. Simon began to think that maybe he had been mistaken and that the leap had not been part of the dating trigger. Despite the words about a leap of faith, they were already prepared for death. But suddenly something unexpected happened. It was as if they fell on something soft. At first they didn't understand what had happened, but it turned out that they hadn't died or even been hurt. A huge trampoline was already waiting for them below, and they landed on it. Piper immediately jumped away from the main character and began asking him if he was okay. As it turned out, it was all April's doing. She managed to set everything up at the very last moment and was glad that Simon trusted her. The hero noted that the girl arrived at the perfect moment, after which he asked Piper if she was injured. But the girl only said that so much had happened in the last few minutes that she needed a couple of minutes alone. Simon immediately shouted that they couldn't just leave because Rena was still inside. But at that moment, the android girl calmly ran out of the building. She was surprised that the date ended the way it did and asked if there would be another date. But Simon doubted it since he was in love with someone else. However, their peace was short-lived, as an enraged Febby followed them and blew out the wall of the building with one blow. The protagonist immediately began to apologize to her, saying that he didn't think anything would work out between them. But it turned out that nothing could calm Febby down. She pointed angrily at Piper, extremely unhappy that he had traded her for such a mediocre girl. Moreover, she pointed to April, suspecting that he was also dating her at the same time. But April had no intention of continuing all this, and asked Febby to pull herself together and stop this scene. But the girl replied that she didn't even want to hear about it, after which she rushed to attack her opponent. She said it was not her place to teach her, after which she called April Little Miss Best Month. Febby declared that all she did was get in her way, take away her sunshine, nullify her efforts, and steal the praise she deserved. At that moment, April turned to Simon and Rena, telling them to grab Piper and get out of here as quickly as possible. After that, she threw 2 tubes of an unknown substance straight towards Febby. She tried to block the attack, but it seemed that everything did not go according to plan. The thing is, there was glue in those flasks, and as soon as it came into contact with Febby's hands, it immediately glued them together. And yet the girl continued to fight. April really irritated her, because everyone always called her the smartest and most useful. She was constantly praised for some absurd things. For example, for not accidentally burning down an orphanage or for always paying taxes. All this was incredibly irritating to Febby, and now her patience was running out. She kicked him, saying she was sick of her and her toys. April was always so serious, even though all she did was hide behind Jen's back. At that moment, the girl suddenly felt a strong pain in her side. The wound to which she had not paid due attention was now making itself felt. Meanwhile, Febby's rage grew, and she declared that compared to a real month like her, April was a complete non-entity. Moreover, she was furious that she had ruined her favorite jacket and had no intention of forgiving her for it. But at that moment, the woman rushed into the attack and hit Febby with a stun gun, saying that she knew she had at least 2 more jackets exactly like that. At that moment, Febby gathered her last strength into a fist and abruptly stopped April's hand. With a maniacal smile, she said that she was trying to get ahead of herself again, but in reality she was just an ordinary amateur. She then kicked her sharply into the fresh wound, causing April to scream in pain. The impact was so strong that she was thrown far to the side and hit her back hard against a concrete wall. Febby had said that Jen would never have allowed Simon to be here, so she didn't understand how April had allowed it, assuming that she was hiding something again. She explained that her little secret investigation wasn't as secret as she thought, and she should have known December would notice. Febby had no idea who she was looking for, but it didn't matter. She could plan anything from the comfort of her hospital bed. However, at that moment they were suddenly stopped by a bright light and a loud sound. Febby immediately turned back and asked what was going on. Behind her, she saw Jen sitting on a motorcycle. He was clearly unhappy with Febby's behavior. Turning to her, he said that this was already her second mistake. However, Febby was clearly unhappy. She said that this matter only concerned her and April, and that Jen should not be here. After that, she immediately launched an attack, calling him an old man and ordering him not to interfere in their affairs. But the man was completely calm. He started his motorcycle and told Febby to leave her jumping attacks to the militants. He stated that the agent should move towards his target with as little effort as possible and then pressed the gas pedal. Using his incredible strength, he used his motorcycle to punch Febby, who was already ready to attack him from the air. The wheel hit the girl right in the face, causing her to lose her balance. The force of the blow was so strong that Febby was thrown far back. After this, the man lowered his motorcycle again and sat on it, preparing for another maneuver. He stood on one wheel and pressed the gas pedal again. At breakneck speed, Jen drove straight in the direction where Febby's body had flown. Moments later, he caught up with her, and before she could even touch the asphalt, grabbed her by the leg. However, he had no intention of saving her at all. Instead, he turned his motorcycle around with renewed vigor and threw Febby somewhere towards the houses. But his punishment did not end there. He again went in the direction where he had just sent the girl. At that moment, Febby herself flew out of someone's window, which shattered from the impact. Left with practically no strength, the girl fell on the asphalt, saying that it was very rough. She asked Jen why he fought so hard, but the man calmly explained that nothing else would have worked on her. However, Febby was not going to give up. Taking advantage of the moment, she took the window frame with the remains of the glass. She threw it towards Jen with all her strength, saying that it hurt a lot. However, not a single muscle moved on the man's face. When the window frame was literally a millimeter from his face, he stopped abruptly. Suddenly, he stuck out his tongue and licked the frame. Watching their fight, the hero asked Rena how Jen knew where to look for them, to which the girl replied that Simon had been chipped. Then he decided to ask the girl how verbose the status in the task trigger usually was. Rena thought for a moment and explained that there are usually 3 to 5 words, but there are different cases. And at that moment, he suddenly pointed to Febby's status, which clearly contained more than 5 words. Seeing this, Rena froze in horror. She calculated that there were only 132 words, which meant that the girl was about to die. The main character himself did not understand how a person could experience so many emotions at the same time. There must be some kind of limit. As expected, Rena's prediction came true. At some point, Febby suddenly stopped and grabbed her head, screaming in pain. However, she quickly came to her senses, laughed, and told Old Man Jen that she could endure this for the rest of her life. After this, she began to provoke the man, saying that all he could do was try to beat her with his bike. However, she was confident that they both knew that she could withstand any blow he could throw at her. And at that moment, she suddenly noticed the main character, who approached her. It seemed like Simon had some kind of plan, but no one around him understood what exactly he was up to. An injured April immediately began to stop him, asking what he wanted to do. Then the hero turned to her and asked her to trust him, saying that now it was his turn to pull her out of trouble. And although he said this with the utmost confidence, he still thought to himself that it seemed to him that the end would soon come. At this point, the system announced the continuation of the date. Simon had 3 options: kiss Febby gently, kiss Febby passionately, or kiss Febby with tongue. All 3 of these options were terrible for Simon. He didn't understand why this system was again giving him options exclusively with kisses. However, Rena explained with delight in her eyes that every ideal date ends with a kiss, and this time the kiss should be lip to lip. At that moment, Febby herself froze in surprise. She still didn't fully believe that Simon had returned to her. She saw with her own eyes how he jumped from the roof, and she already thought that he was dead. The girl suddenly burst into tears, saying that she really thought Simon hated her so much that he was ready to jump off the roof just to avoid being with her. But suddenly the main character approached her, passionately grabbed her and pressed her to himself, saying that he could not hate her. In the most loving voice he could muster, he said that he would try to express it more clearly in the future and would start right now. At that moment, Febby screamed in fear. She was very confused and did not believe that Simon had actually decided to take this step. But instead of answering, the main character leaned towards her and tenderly kissed the girl on the lips. Meanwhile, Jen watched all this from the sidelines. Judging by April's face, she was very stunned by what was happening. At the same time, Piper was very embarrassed, and Rena apparently was unhappy about something. Meanwhile, the kiss between the protagonist and Febby continued. Simon decided to do everything to prove his love to her. Thus, their date ended successfully, and now our heroes could rest easy. Once it was over, Simon finally pulled away from Febby's lips and let out a tired sigh as the kiss had lasted for so long. The girl herself was already on the edge. Her face was flushed, and her spirit seemed to have left her body. While Simon was holding the almost lifeless Febby in his arms, Piper suddenly came up to him and called out to him, Looking at the hero in surprise, she asked what he had gotten himself into. And then an enthusiastic Rina intervened in the conversation, expressing hope that she and Febby would have a second date. Despite this, the protagonist stated that there was no talk of a second date, but at the same time he understood that he needed to somehow explain everything to Piper. Then he looked at her with an awkward grin and asked if she knew what a dating simulator was. When it was all over, the boys finally got into the car and drove home, while Rina thought that the first step had been successfully completed. In the end, Simon had a job and he also went on a date, and in her opinion, it couldn't have been better. However, she suddenly felt that the strange sensations she had recently experienced had suddenly repeated themselves. The moment she defended Simon and yelled at Febby, she felt like there was a fire inside her that she couldn't contain. Then the girl looked at Simon and decided to ask him something. But before she could finish her thought, she saw that the protagonist was already dozing off, and Piper had settled on his shoulder and also fallen asleep. Rina decided not to wake them, but again felt something strange. Even though she was an android, it felt like her mechanical heart had skipped a beat. The girl noted to herself that this time everything was somehow different. Before, her sensations had been large-scale and vivid. However, now they were somehow small and seemingly stuffy. They made her feel very uncomfortable. Unable to contain her feelings, Rina reached out and lightly touched the protagonist's cheek with her fingertips. She moved her hand slightly upward and lightly touched a strand of his hair, adjusting it. But then she jerked her hand away, trying to convince herself that it was just some kind of glitch in her system. Looking out the window, Rina decided that this was just another glitch in the system that she needed to fix. Soon, at the calendar meeting, it was reported that February had failed. April and January had done their job, but the final blow had been dealt by the target itself, and yet the corporation was not fazed. The chairman said that knowing February, she would most likely try her luck again, and they could only hope for less material damage. However, participant number 3 said that this was a waste of time. He wanted those idiots from the corporation to stop wasting their time on this nonsense and kill the kid. Then contestant number 8 said that would deprive them of the funniest missions of all time. But another person responded that she had no style at all. At this point, participant number 10 intervened in the conversation. She was sure that Mart was simply afraid that she wouldn't be able to seduce this guy. At this point, a rather heated argument broke out between the calendar members, and then the chairperson, member number 12, asked November to vacate October's place. She then noted that several members were absent from the meeting. January, February, and April were all absent for obvious reasons. May had the day off, but it was unclear what was wrong with July. June said she was at her part-time job at a mattress store in the mall and had been uninvolved so far. Then December turned to everyone else, saying that she had heard their complaints and suggestions, but they would still proceed according to the plan. After that, she turned to the others and asked if they had anything they wanted to tell her, but no one had any ideas. This suited December just fine, and she said that as soon as the opportunity arose, they would be able to prove themselves in this hunt in any way they could. The woman also noted that if April and January interfered, they would be able to see what Rina and her Mr. Knight were truly capable of. Meanwhile, the android girl stated that since Simon had successfully gotten the job, he had completed the first step of his plan to return. However, the hero himself was horrified. He said that it was as if his soul had been sucked out of him and he practically saw the light at the end of the tunnel. But Rina was not discouraged. She declared that this meant that the time had come for the second step, after which they headed to the shopping center. The main character assumed that his new date would have something to do with shopping. The girl explained that he needed to update his wardrobe, since her research showed that people judge a person by their clothes. The protagonist still didn't believe that they were doing this, because so much time had passed since those 2 bodyguards were constantly hovering over his shoulder. However, January ended up going on his own mission, and April left them to meet a friend, although Simon didn't even suspect that she had any friends at all. Looking at his savings account, he sighed, hoping that he had enough money for new clothes and that Rina had taken the budget into account in her plan. However, realizing that he was ready to give all the money in the world for a date with Rina, he immediately ran through the shopping center, grabbing the girl by the hand. Simon was ready to start over with a clean slate so that no one would see him as a disappointment anymore. And instead, he would appear to the world as a completely new Simon. Meanwhile, the boys didn't even suspect that someone was watching them from around the corner. As it turned out, it was none other than February. She was undercover and was now furious because Simon went clothes shopping and did not invite her. Meanwhile, he and Rina were already in the clothing store, and the main character tried on a white shirt and trousers, but the girl said that it was too simple. When he tried on a black coat, cropped jeans, and a hat, she noted that it was now too flashy. He then tried on some strange costume, more like an adventurer's costume, and Rena immediately noted that it looked strange. After that, it was her turn, and the first thing she tried on was a white knee-length dress, and Simon immediately noted that she looked amazing. When she tried on a more formal option, namely a white shirt and skirt, Simon again could not contain his emotions and said that she looked great. Finally, Rena tried on a futuristic costume, and for the main character, this look was a real winner among all. He was so overwhelmed with emotion that the system announced the start of a date with some strangers. But despite all of Rena's persuasion, Simon refused. Afterwards, they headed to a toy store where Simon found his limited edition toys, which were currently on sale at a 90% discount. Then they went to the vibrating chairs with Rena to relax a little. And apparently, Simon relaxed so much that he began to make some strange sounds, which greatly embarrassed Rena. But as soon as the android girl sat down in such a chair, she understood why it made such sounds. After that, the guys went to the tech store to look at new monitors. They were so bright that Simon felt like he was blushing while looking at them, and Rena called it a picture and a crust. After that, they headed to a cafe. But looking at his empty wallet, Simon realized that this would no longer fit into his budget. Instead, he suggested that Rena go to a cheaper place and order a hot dog. After that, they went to the hairdresser, where Simon got a very unusual haircut. Rena also picked out a new hairstyle for herself and even liked how she looked with short hair. As the boys walked further through the mall, she saw a cleaning robot there, and Simon was surprised that they could talk to each other. The girl then pointed to the drink machine and said that maybe he was also looking for a relationship, but Simon asked her not to even remind him about it. Then they walked further down the corridors of the shopping center, and at that moment they suddenly passed by the window of a store, and something made the main character stop. When he looked closer, he saw that a very beautiful necklace with an iridescent star was being sold there. Soon after, the guys headed to karaoke, where Rena performed an incredible hit. The hero immediately began to praise her, saying that she sang simply perfectly, and the girl was very happy with such words. Simon said it was even better than perfect, as if the singer herself were singing it. Then he asked her if she could sing the same thing, but with her own voice, he was sure that she would sound just wonderful. However, at that moment, Rena suddenly became sad and noted that she had never tried to sing anything with her own voice before. Moreover, she didn't even understand what it meant. Soon, their so-called date was coming to an end. The hero noted that they not only picked out clothes for him, but also managed to fit into a limited budget. He also couldn't help but note that he had had a very fun day today. For the main character, a date with Rena was like a dream come true, so he couldn't help but rejoice. The girl herself said that she had never been to a shopping mall and was surprised that there could be so many interesting things in one place. She said she would cherish this memory forever, but she wondered if the feeling she had experienced today would stay with her too. At that moment, Simon looked at her in surprise, not fully understanding what she was talking about. And then he suddenly decided that they could help her preserve these memories with the help of one thing. He pointed to a photo booth that was right in front of them and invited Rena to go inside. The girl was surprised why this was necessary, since he could have photographed everything on his phone. But Simon suggested that real photographs have their own magic. He himself wasn't entirely sure of it. But one day Piper told him something very interesting. When there is something tangible that you can touch, feel, and experience, then it becomes real. And that is exactly what happened to Rena. After this, Simon pressed the button and asked the girl to get ready for the photo. However, Rena didn't react to this in any way. She was still absorbed in his words about her being real. The protagonist said that the first photo could begin with a smile and a peace sign, but at that moment the android girl's hand reached out to him. Suddenly she grabbed his face and asked what he had just said. Leaning very close to him, the girl asked Simon to say those words again. The main character blushed deeply and froze from embarrassment due to the fact that Rena was so close to him. Just then, the photo booth decided to take a photo, and the bright flash finally brought Simon back to his senses. When they left the photo booth, the hero was clearly unhappy that such a moment had been slightly ruined. Meanwhile, Rena looked at the photographs and noted that she wasn't looking her best, but perhaps that was the way it should be. At that moment, they suddenly heard someone screaming coming from a nearby mattress store. The overweight man said he had come to complain about the faulty water mattresses, but the consultant said it was all his fault. A girl named Jules said she tried to warn him because these mattresses have a weight limit. At this point, the man became even more angry, realizing that she was hinting that he was fat. Jules explained that that wasn't what she meant, but ultimately decided not to argue and simply agreed that he was fat. The man continued to yell at her, and the whole situation was starting to get a little annoying for the girl. She looked into her small purse, realizing she needed another lollipop. She seemed completely oblivious to the man, who still wouldn't calm down and continued shouting at her. Then he started asking Jules who their manager was here. In response, the girl looked at him with a sly grin and said that she was the manager. Then the man began to accuse her of the fact that her generation was the worst, that no one here respected people or had a work ethic. Simon, watching from the sidelines, noted that the service industry was always some kind of hell wherever you went, and that no one should have to endure this verbal humiliation for pennies. Then he decided to pass by and called Rena with him, telling her not to pay attention to it. Meanwhile, the man continued to yell that Jules had clearly never worked a day in her life, and that these kids were just trying to make money playing their video games. These words truly angered the protagonist, and he immediately rushed back to the store intending to deal with the fat man. But because he forgot that his dating system was activated by excessive emotions, he found himself in a bad situation again. While he was trying to start an argument with the man, explaining to him that streaming is also difficult, the system informed him about the start of another date. But Simon seemed to ignore this, talking about how hard it was for him to complete games without dying, as well as take part in all sorts of stupid challenges. At this point, the system reported Jules' status. She was tired, confused, and apathetic. But Simon continued to argue with the fat man, saying that they needed to deal with contracts, promotion, and collaboration schedules. He stated that every video and every piece of content is made by hand, and that every streamer must be a master of image, sound, and also have a sense of humor. At the same time, their older generation can't even connect to the internet, and when they do, they only consume one word, so there's no point in even mentioning it. It seemed that the man was so frightened by the protagonist's pressure that he simply decided to run away from the store. Simon then apologized to Jules for getting a little carried away and explained that his girlfriend was a proponent of customers not bad-mouthing employees. However, the girl only thanked him for intervening, after which she noticed something. At this moment, the main character began to shake with fear. He thought that he had accidentally revealed his identity. Jules slowly leaned towards him and began to examine his face closely. But then she suddenly pulled back, gave him a thumbs up, and told him he was a really cool guy. She didn't know if he had come there for a mattress, but she said she could give him a discount as a token of her gratitude. Simon noted that his mattress was falling apart, but he didn't know if he could afford to buy a new one. Realizing that the protagonist would hardly be able to find enough money to make the purchase, Jules offered him a 99% discount. Simon was very surprised and asked if she was seriously ready to offer him such a discount, and the girl suggested that it was still too expensive for him. And then the main character thought about how good it would be for him to have a new mattress, which would be even bigger than his old one. Then he decided not to refuse such a generous offer, and he and Jules shook hands. However, the girl said that first they needed to find the most suitable mattress for his lifestyle. Simon was immediately excited, thinking that he would just have to fill out some form and the staff would find him a mattress. However, it all ended with Jules starting to tell him her life story, and it all ended with her telling him how she lost her 17th job. However, in the end, the agency took her to another place, and that is how she ended up here. Simon then decided to ask her how long she would go with them, to which Jules said that she needed to determine what kind of person he really was. She explained that mattresses are very important in a person's life, and suggested that this is because people sleep on them every night. The longer they spent time together, the more she revealed completely unnecessary information about herself. The main character was horrified, realizing that he could not get rid of this obsessive girl. Now his date with Rena had turned into some kind of ridiculous threesome, and he had already regretted 100 times that he had agreed to buy this mattress. This green-haired girl was ruining their whole romantic vibe, and he even began to assume that she was doing it on purpose. However, Simon decided that he needed to calm down. He couldn't let some stranger ruin his date. He decided that now he needed to think about the mattress, which he could get for literally next to nothing. And then he suddenly noticed something strange. When Simon looked at Jules, he saw that she was drinking from his own glass, with her own straw in it. When Rena saw this, her eyes lit up with delight, and she immediately thought that a date had begun between them. She even noted that it was incredibly brave of them because they did it in front of everyone. At the time, Jules noted that it wasn't her favorite drink flavor, but it was pretty cool. In response, the main character only looked at her in horror, and at that moment he realized that he couldn't take it anymore. He threw the glass at the wall, saying that this was his last straw. He then jumped up from the table, saying that Jules could forget about the mattresses, and asked if she could see that he was currently on a date with someone else. But there was absolutely no emotion on the girl's face. She only briefly apologized for it. Meanwhile, Simon was furious, saying that with such dialogue, it seemed like the date was solely revolving around Jules. Moreover, he was very irritated by the lollipop that she constantly kept in her mouth, so he came up to her and abruptly took it out. But when he looked at the wand in his hand, he realized that it was empty. There should have been a lollipop on it, but it simply wasn't there. When Simon looked at Jules, it seemed to him that she was dying, and at that moment she suddenly swallowed something. The girl was clearly unhappy that she had swallowed the candy and almost choked on it. At this moment, the main character began to come to his senses a little and realized that he had ended up somewhere wrong. He apologized to Jules, saying that he was willing to buy her a new lollipop, but her reaction was not at all what he expected. The girl immediately began to emit an ominous aura. She chuckled, saying that she had held up so well, but in the end, everything went down the drain. She turned to Simon, saying that he seemed to like girls on the rougher side. Looking at him with crazy eyes, Jules said that she was not at all against it, since she liked to be a little brutal herself. And then suddenly she hit the table with her palm, splitting it in half. She decided that she was fed up with this submissive behavior, and that she could no longer restrain herself. She said with a crazy laugh that Simon had just won himself a date with July. At that moment, the main character froze in horror, realizing that in front of him was another member of this calendar group. Jules laughed sinisterly, asking Simon if he was ready to have some fun with a real woman. However, at that moment, the security guards intervened in their conversation. They stopped the girl, asking what she was doing there. The men immediately pointed their guns at her, ordering her to put her hands up. But before they could say anything, Jules appeared behind them and delivered a powerful slashing blow. In an instant, the unfortunate guards were completely naked, and Jules just laughed. She noted that, unfortunately, these little people break very easily, and therefore she was not at all interested in it. Then she turned her attention back to the hero of the occasion, namely Simon. But to her surprise, when she turned around, she saw that he was already running away from the cafe with Rena. The android girl seemed unaware of the danger at hand, asking why they were running away from their date, to which Simon replied that they were more likely running away from his funeral. At that moment, the system suddenly began to give him messages about extreme danger, after which it launched the SBR protocol. Suddenly, the system gave him a message that he needed to duck, and when the hero turned around, he saw that Jules's leg was already flying at him. At the last moment, heeding the system's advice, he ducked sharply, and thus the girl flew past him. But when the hero looked up, he saw her right in front of him. Jules clearly had no intention of letting him go. She said that she finally had the opportunity to relax. She yelled at Simon, asking if he knew how bad it was to work in the service industry, and that he was pretty good until he started to annoy her as much as everyone else. But now everything was different. This world. This was her rage room, and Simon, her date, and it was all real. Therefore, the girl stated that from now on he should be careful not to upset her. Meanwhile, ordinary shoppers in the stores were puzzled as to what was going on in the shopping center. Simon was trying his best to get away from Jules while the madwoman was chasing after him, and Rena was running after him. At some point, the main character felt that the steps behind him seemed to be getting louder. And then the system suddenly gave him another warning that he needed to roll. Realizing that this was his only salvation, he immediately did as the system told him to and rolled between the toy boxes. This way, he was able to avoid a blow from Jules, which ended up hitting the stand with his photo. Then, at the system's request, he jumped over the bakery counters, which greatly frightened the poor bakery workers. A moment later, Jules fell onto the counter, her weight shattering all the glass shelves. And although she was very absorbed in the chase, she suddenly smelled a very pleasant smell of baking. The girl immediately began looking around in search of her favorite biscuits. In front of her, she saw a small cake, but unfortunately, it was already stuffed with pieces of broken glass. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Rena hid around the corner, and Simon thought that this girl called herself July, which means she is an agent of the calendar. Looking around the corner, he wondered how much longer he could hold out. The system offered him 3 possible answers, one of which could involve kissing her, and this began to irritate the protagonist. But he also remembered how much the kiss had affected February, thus preventing the disaster from happening. So, when he came out of his hiding place, he decided that if he kissed Jules, he could end all of this sooner. Raising his hands in a calming gesture, he asked Jules to wait a bit and talk about everything calmly. He said that he knew that she was a calendar agent and had come here to seduce him. However, the girl seemed to have heard some nonsense and looked at Simon in surprise. He froze in horror, hoping that his guess had been correct, and that he hadn't made a complete idiot of himself. An awkward silence fell between them as Jules stared at him. She then said with displeasure that Simon really was a master of deduction. She assumed he had already been told about the reward and asked if it didn't turn Simon on, to which he replied that it rather drove him to a nervous breakdown. Then the girl said that she already knew about it, but she had to make sure that he would survive if they were together. And then the main character realized that she was distracted, which meant this was his chance. Taking advantage of the moment, he immediately approached Jules and grabbed her by the shoulder, while Rena watched everything that was happening. Simon gently hugged the girl around the waist, and with his other hand grabbed her legs, while Jules herself was perplexed. After that, he leaned towards her and gently kissed her on the lips. Jules herself didn't respond to this in any way, she just looked at Simon with a stony face. Meanwhile, Rena was happy. It was another kiss on the first date, and she was glad that Simon didn't stop kissing. However, she asked him to remember that he also had other options. At that moment, Simon froze, moving away from Jules and really hoping that his plan had worked. The girl was still in a daze, not knowing how to react to such a gesture. However, then she suddenly grinned slyly, and an unkind glint flashed in her eyes. Taking advantage of Simon's confusion, she immediately seized the initiative, grabbed him by the waist and bent him over the ground. Looking at him with wild eyes, Jules asked if that was all he could do. Without giving the protagonist a chance to respond, she leaned towards him and forcefully kissed him on the lips. Jules didn't stop there and decided that this kiss should include tongue. Soon after, she pulled away from Simon and sighed contentedly. Then, with a sly grin, she asked the protagonist if it was true that this was his first kiss with tongue. Simon jerked away from her, shaking with terror, and then he realized that this strategy hadn't worked on Jules. The girl explained that she is not as simple as Phoebe, and that immediately jumping in with kisses is not a solution to all problems, and also added that this is generally considered harassment. At that moment, Rena realized that her charges were in danger and decided to save him. She grabbed his hand and pulled him away, saying that it was okay if the kiss failed, but now they needed to run around a little more. At that moment, the protagonist's phone suddenly started ringing, and as it turned out, it was April. Stopping behind a column, Simon decided to catch his breath and answered the call, saying that what he was about to say might sound crazy. When he told her everything, she said that they couldn't have guessed that there was a calendar agent working in the mall, and that she was even crazier than February. She said that Jules was faster than February, and unlike her, knew how to fight. So the fact that Simon was still alive meant that she was just playing with him. Then the hero asked what he should do. But April explained that if he didn't have a tank hidden away, then nothing. And even so, he would still suffer because of her nails. However, the girl promised to put him in touch with someone who could help him, after which she wished Simon good luck. Before the main character had time to answer, the girl had already hung up. And then the system again gave him a notification that he needed to hide immediately. Before Simon could do so, he looked in horror as the column he was hiding behind was literally cut to pieces. As soon as the boulders scattered, he saw Jules in front of him again, enveloped in an ominous aura. However, she did not see either Simon or Rena in front of her, and she was already beginning to be filled with anger, since she did not understand where these scoundrels had gone. As it turned out, the guys took advantage of the moment and hid in the photo booth. Simon hoped that Rena would have some kind of idea, but the girl couldn't offer anything other than a date. At that moment, their phone suddenly rang and a strange woman approached them, saying that she had a couple of ideas. Rena immediately greeted her, and the woman said that she was very glad to see them face to face, calling them her little lab rats. With a sly grin, she said that Agent August had arrived at their service, noting that it was at the request of a certain birdie. She explained that April had told her everything honestly, even though she had tried so hard to put July into a trance. After what the corporation had done to her, it was far from easy, and August would have teamed up with them if she hadn't been literally killed for it. Simon then asked her what she meant by August putting her into a trance, and the woman explained that this was her specialty. She did this in order to make something more sweet and pleasant out of the individual he was currently messing with. And it was in this state that he met her for the first time. August explained that all Jules needed to do to calm down was suck on a lollipop, adding that it looked quite hilarious, but it was all thanks to her hypnosis. This makes her much easier to control, and luckily her lollipops are particularly long-lasting, but when stressed, she still swallows them whole. Then August asked how it happened that she swallowed her lollipop, but the heroes replied that even for them it remained a mystery. Finally, the woman said that he either needed to get Jules a lollipop or wear her out somehow, but the latter option would take about 2 or 3 days. Finally, she wished him good luck and told him not to die prematurely, after which she said goodbye to him. At that moment, the boys suddenly heard the photo booth canvas behind them begin to tear into pieces. A moment later, Jules' face was sticking out from there, asking if they really needed her photo so they wouldn't forget about her. Immediately after this, the mad chase continued, and while Simon and Rena were terrified, Jules herself declared that she had never had so much fun. She cried out joyfully that no one had ever been able to hold out for so long. She then added that this was the place where everyone always broke down, but she still hoped that Simon would be able to stand firm. At that moment, the protagonist realized that he no longer had the ability to resist. As he saw Jules' claws approaching him, he mentally apologized to Rena for screwing up like that in front of her. At that moment, the android girl suddenly felt strange sensations. She seemed to be shaking, her mouth was dry, and it seemed to her that she could not breathe. She was overcome with horror at the realization that Simon could die right now. Moments when they had such a fun time together began to appear in her head. She remembered that fun shift at the coffee shop, which they spent from start to finish together. She also remembered what happened today in the photo booth when Simon said she was real. And at that moment, the system reported that the installation was complete and SBR dates were enabled. The protagonist saw another answer option in front of him. He could propose to Jules right now. Realizing that this was his only chance for salvation, he immediately dropped to one knee in front of the girl, causing her to stop in surprise. Now he was being asked to take a leap and hug her, and even though Simon cursed all these dating triggers, he knew he had no choice. He immediately rushed forward and hugged Jules, hoping that at least this would save him from death. When the protagonist's arms wrapped around the girl's waist, she froze for a moment. She then laughed, saying that Simon really could do anything if he wanted to, and that she had been right to think he was special. The next moment they fell and took with them a huge stand with various lollipops. The hero understood that this was his only chance, and he needed to grab the lollipop as quickly as possible and put it in Jules' mouth. However, the girl stopped him by knocking the candy right out of his hands and said that she was not going to back down yet, especially when the fun had begun. Watching the lollipop spinning in the air, Simon froze, wondering what he should do now. And then the system suggested that he spin Jules around in a dance. Realizing he had no other choice, the protagonist decided to trust the simulator and grabbed the girl's hand, then spun her around. A real dance began between them, with various swings, turns, and promenades. Then Simon's gaze caught the lollipop flying past again, but he still didn't know how to catch it. Then the system suggested that he perform a tango element and bend over. But Jules herself had already started to get angry again, saying that she was tired of it. But Simon didn't listen to her and instead grabbed her tightly by the waist. On the system's advice, he performed a bend, holding the girl firmly above the ground. While she was busy making fun of him again, Simon tried to feel the lollipop flying above them with his hand. In the end, he managed to catch the candy with his teeth. Taking advantage of the moment, he leaned over sharply and stuck the candy right into the green-haired girl's mouth. At this point, the system reported that the date was over, and Simon had achieved 777 points in the dance, which became a new record. At that moment, Jules suddenly froze in bewilderment. However, she calmed down quite quickly since these candies really did have a calming effect on her. Then she straightened up and looked at Simon with indifference, while he himself fell exhausted to the floor. Rena immediately rushed to him to bring her friend to his senses. The hero himself experienced a whole range of emotions. He still did not believe that it was all finally over, because he thought that it was already the end for him. When Rena helped him get up, he said that everything hurt, but he would definitely live, and it was all thanks to the system. Then the girl said with a smile that they were able to cope with it. And then suddenly Jules squatted down and turned to the main character. She said it had all been quite fun. She hadn't had the chance to relax like that for a long time, so she thanked Simon. Moreover, she even suggested repeating this sometime and asked if he needed a mattress. But now the hero just wanted to go home. At that moment, April appeared behind him and immediately began asking if Jules had heard him. When Simon noticed her, he realized that the girl looked very unusual. Instead of her usual military uniform, she was wearing a yellow dress. The protagonist was so overwhelmed by the feeling of surprise at her new appearance that the system reactivated the date. April turned to him and congratulated him on his survival, saying that surviving the meeting with Jules was a reason to celebrate this day well. Simon saw 3 possible responses: compliment her outfit, say she would wear it next time, or ask her to change from her summer dress into her wedding dress. By choosing the first option, Simon said that her shopping partner had a very keen eye, as yellow was definitely her color. Hearing this, April blushed, saying that she was glad that she didn't look too pretentious, but asked Simon not to get too used to it. She said the dress had great pockets big enough to hold a grenade, and she was thinking of adding a couple more for when she needed to go undercover. She then asked Jules how she was feeling, and the girl replied that the mattress store had just written to her saying she was fired. She said she would go sit on the massage chair and wait for Otto or Gaz, and then asked Simon to call her later. Meanwhile, February watched all this and shook with rage, not believing that Simon had spent the whole day shopping with other women. She herself was a model and a professional cosplayer and did not understand why he did not invite her, because she could help him much better than these pathetic worms. At that moment, the real Jules next to her reminded her that she was actually here too. However, February ignored her and left the toilet, hoping that Simon would call or at least write. And at that moment, she suddenly heard someone's voice asking if she really couldn't do without this guy. In front of her, she saw a young man, it was June, who said that he was ready to introduce her to Simon. However, he added that he would do so on the condition that she kindly gave him the reward once they severed her connection with Rena. When evening came, the main character went to a coffee shop. An awkward conversation ensued between him and Piper, and suddenly the girl asked him to come closer. She gently placed her hand on his cheek and began to carefully move it up to his hair. The girl noted to herself that she understood how stupid it looked, but another part of her literally screamed that she had to do it. Soon after, the protagonist told her about how crazy his day had been. He said he had never moved so fast in his life, and Piper remarked that he had truly had an unforgettable weekend. However, she then noticed Simon's new haircut and asked how angry he had made the hairdresser to do that to him. The hero asked if she didn't like his new hairstyle, to which the girl replied that she could barely hold back the urge to gag when looking at it. At this moment, the main character suddenly thought about something. After waiting for Piper to change into her casual clothes, he approached her again. To her surprise, he handed her a small red box and said that he bought it for her. Simon looked down in embarrassment and said he bought the item as an apology for everything he had gotten her into. The girl silently accepted the gift and carefully opened the small box. What she saw inside made her eyes sparkle with delight. As it turned out, there was that pendant with the sprocket inside, but it broke a little during yesterday's running. Simon explained that Piper had taken risks for him and that he had dragged her into his problems even though he hadn't really meant to. However, the girl approached him and, without letting him finish, said that this was what he really wanted. She explained that she was talking about the dating simulator and, in particular, about Rena. She stated that in reality he had chosen all of this himself. At that moment, Simon froze, not fully understanding what exactly she meant. Piper explained that she still didn't fully understand what he'd gotten himself into, but apparently he didn't realize it himself either. However, as strange as it may sound, it seemed to her that all this was helping him. Piper admitted to herself that Rena was indeed helping him cope with everything that was happening. So she asked Simon to simply promise that he would try to avoid situations where his life hung in the balance. As it turned out, she gave him the broken piece of the pendant and reminded him that he also couldn't miss shifts at work. Piper also said that if she asked him to show her the other half of his apology gift, she hoped it would be safe and sound. In response, Simon said that it wasn't even a question, since with this simulator in his head, he could handle anything, but only within the limits of dating. At that moment, the girl's face suddenly darkened, and Simon did not understand why. Then she suddenly pulled him towards her by the jacket and said that she couldn't do this anymore. Piper thought to herself that she realized how stupid this all looked. Everything in her body was trying to convince her not to get involved in all this, because if she was near Simon, she would also be in danger. However, another part of her literally screamed that she could lose everything right now, and if she loses him now, she might never find him again. Then Piper patted the protagonist's head, removing his terrible hair, and now he looked like the Simon she knew. The hero noted that he really felt much better this way. And then the girl suddenly mentioned his simulator again. It seemed like she wanted to ask something, but was too embarrassed. She decided to change the subject and asked if it was true that only dates activated him, and Simon explained that he activated them himself, but lately it seemed like he was living his own life. However, this simulator saved him from Jules with these strange choices that he might not need anymore. At least he really hoped so. Meanwhile, the story moves forward shortly before this moment, as it turns out. Before meeting Simon, April decided to go shopping with a friend. She herself wasn't very fond of choosing clothes, but her companion was practically a master at it. However, at that moment, April suddenly stopped because January was calling her. The girl immediately picked up the phone, and he told her that apparently the woman was near her. April was shocked that December let her out, and then January asked to keep Simon and the android away from there, and then everything would be okay. He explained that this time they had placed Jules in a mattress store, and then added that if she needed help, August should be free. Immediately after that, April headed to the observation room with Jen. He said that Simon should have been dead 7 times by now, even if Jules had just been messing around with him, and April suggested that Rena's simulator was helping him. Jen then noted that to call his movements awkward and rough would be a gross understatement, but his reaction speed was acceptable. Then April asked if she should question him, but the man said that there was no need to do that and asked her to leave the boy with him. The story then shifts back to the present day, where Simon was once again sent to some kind of training that was physically taxing on him. One day he was woken up so early that he didn't even have time to eat breakfast, and Rena assumed that Jen had woken him up for a breakfast date. And then suddenly Simon wondered where he was right now, and the girl suggested that it was a liminal space. Jen explained that they were in a place where calendar agents trained. There was no room for breakfast, and his meeting with Jules, where he almost died, was very interesting to him. He said that July should have broken him at the very least, but he came back without a scratch, and Jen believed that Rena's simulator was to blame. The girl herself said that it was really cool. The date was heading for a bad ending, but then everything turned out for the better, and now she called it a SBR date. Jen explained that this so-called SBR date saved Simon's life, and that it was partly his work. Then he pressed some buttons and said that they would have to use it. Anything that keeps Simon alive is necessary, and anything that is used ineffectively is a waste. At that moment, the hero froze in horror, seeing that numerous cannons were pointed at him, ready to fire at any moment. Jen stated that if there was even a hint of fighting potential in his head, he was ready to extract it from him through sweat and blood. At that moment, the guns actually started firing, and the protagonist began frantically dodging the shots. Jen explained that his training would be similar to a real fight with calendar agents. But to Simon, it didn't look like training, but rather like an attempt to kill him. But Jen stood his ground, saying they were waiting for his simulator to deign to connect, and until then, they would keep trying. Some time passed and Simon was completely exhausted. He was lying on the floor, shaking with fatigue. Jen noted that the results were disappointing. He had no reaction, but for April, this was not even surprising. Then she helped Simon up, and he thanked her for her help, hoping that she would save him. But instead, the girl put a helmet on him, saying that danger alone wasn't enough, so they would add human elements to it. After that, she put on boxing gloves herself, and Jen asked her not to hold back. Simon realized that they were about to have a sparring match, but he felt that the machine guns were much more dangerous, because he was sure that April wouldn't hit him seriously. But his assumption turned out to be wrong. The girl knocked him down with one blow so hard that Simon choked in pain. The girl pinned him to the floor with her body, grabbing his hand, and Simon began to frantically beat the floor, saying that he was giving up. But Jen was not satisfied with this result, and said that they needed to try again. Simon tried to object, saying that they all knew how this would end. But April obeyed the order and threw him on the floor again. Jen didn't let up and ordered her to do it again, despite Simon's best efforts to convince them that that wasn't how it worked. No one listened to him. After that, the man said that they needed to try again. April whispered to the hero that if she had given it her all, he would have died long ago. Moreover, she spoke out against weapons testing. The hero then asked her what their clever plan was, since so far they had simply beaten him mercilessly. Then the girl tightened her grip again and pressed Simon even tighter to herself. Their bodies were so close to each other that a blush suddenly appeared on the protagonist's face. Then April whispered in his ear, saying that she was still thinking about that kiss. As soon as she said this, Simon's eyes suddenly lit up, and the system notified him that the date had started. He turned to the girl and asked her in bewilderment what she was talking about. He saw 3 possible answers before him, 2 of which would lead to further conversation, and if he chose the third option, he would simply start stuttering. At that moment, April pulled away from him sharply, asking if there was a dating system in place, and the hero confirmed it. She then turned to Jen, saying that she felt like the emergency protocol couldn't be activated under these conditions. Hearing this, Simon was delighted, thinking that April really had a heart. She said they needed to wait for further results and then compare them, but Jen said they had one last test left that only he could do. He told Simon that meeting July was tantamount to death, but here he was faced with only a couple of scratches and apparently did not sense the danger strongly enough. So the man said that what he was about to do was to make him feel the danger. Simon asked the man with fear in his voice what he was going to do. He hoped until the very end that Jen was just joking and that this was all part of their training, but he declared that it was time to die. At that moment, both Simon and Rena realized that January was deadly serious. His body was enveloped in an ominous aura that literally trampled the protagonist into the floor. Realizing that the man was going to kill him, he immediately ran away, and the system again began to give him danger messages. She ordered him to run like crazy, and Simon had no other choice, so he obeyed. However, Jen caught up with him pretty quickly, and then the system ordered him to turn left. Managing to do this in time, Simon was able to dodge the punch that was heading straight for him. However, the shockwave from such a strong blow was so strong that he was still thrown aside. Still, Simon felt more confident, knowing that if he kept listening to the system, he could handle this guy. However, he immediately took advantage of his momentary confusion and appeared behind him, grabbing the hero tightly by the neck. At this point, Simon became truly scared and took a while to catch his breath. Jen praised him, saying that he now felt a real intent to kill him and that it most likely would not be his last time. He also said that Rena's simulator was quite impressive, but it was not perfect, and Simon's current physical abilities did not allow him to fully develop. However, he said that he just needed to start from the base and work from there, and that he and April would take turns training him from the next day. Finally, he once again praised the main character for his good work and for the fact that he was able to survive. As soon as it was all over, Simon immediately threw himself into Rena's arms, saying that his heart was literally jumping out of his chest from fear. He then cast a disgruntled glance at April, who had not helped him in any way, to which the girl replied that Jen was actually on his side. Simon acted as if he had never done any sports before. She also said that if he thought it was hard, he should try her workout program, and then he would realize how much stricter Jen was with her and Phoebe. Simon pointed out that Phoebe ended up like this because of him, but April explained that it wasn't their fault. It was all her emotions and what she had to deal with. However, she asked Simon to believe that Jen actually cared about them and even praised him for his excellent work. When he trained April herself, she never heard a single good word from him. He was cold, and she always felt a certain distance between them. She assumed it was because Jen was always the best at everything. Simon said that she did not deserve to be treated like that, and although the girl had a different opinion, she still thanked him for such words. At that moment, the hero's phone literally started to explode with numerous notifications. When he looked at the screen, he realized that he had not set the reminder for himself in vain. As it turned out, he managed to buy tickets in time for a meeting with Rena, which will take place this weekend. At that moment, the android girl suddenly spoke up, not understanding why Simon was talking about Rena when she herself was here. Then the main character explained that he meant the real Rena. As soon as the android girl heard this, she suddenly began to feel sad. She managed to smile, though, saying that if he went to this meeting, he might get triggered for a date again. The long-awaited weekend soon arrived, and a huge crowd of people came to the event to meet their favorite VTubers. There were a lot of people who came in cosplay. As expected, most people gathered at the stand where Rena was supposed to be. There were a lot of people there who wanted to take pictures with her. Meanwhile, Piper had put on a special suit in preparation for the meeting. She knew no one would see her, but she still felt nervous being there in person. She could have done all this from home, but people came here to see Rena, and she wanted to make every effort to do so. Then she carefully peered out from behind the screen and began to look for the one she was waiting for most of all. Piper was sure that if Simon were in her place, he would have done exactly the same thing. Meanwhile, the main character's companion also came to the meeting. Jen addressed the boys, asking them how this meeting would help with their mission. He said that streamers attend such meetings all the time, and it can practically be called a business meeting. His eyes were dazzled by how many things there were connected with his beloved Rena. Jen remarked that he thought the guy was the easiest mark of them all, but April suggested that it was part of his charm. Watching the action through cameras, she said she would be on the lookout for threats, but such a large crowd made things more difficult. Moreover, there were a lot of security guards at the event, and people with weapons were not allowed in, so Jen himself was unarmed. Moreover, Simon and Rena also came here undercover, since otherwise the main character would have simply been attacked by fans wanting to take pictures with him. Jen said that as soon as Simon finished talking to this 2D girl he had parasocial feelings for, he would immediately drag him out of here. At this moment, a small group of people had already gathered around him, who were very frightened by his height and muscles. However, suddenly he saw in front of him a little boy who was not at all frightened by his appearance. But his mother quickly took him away, apologizing to Jen, saying that her son was a big fan of secret agents and really liked his cosplay. At that moment, Jen looked at himself carefully, not understanding what this woman was talking about because he was in his usual suit. Then he decided to ask April what cosplay was, but the girl told him not to bother his head. It was nonsense. At this point, the protagonist approached Rena and said that he had already bought everything he needed, but the bad news was that he wouldn't eat for a whole week because of it. Nevertheless, he was very pleased with the things he managed to buy. He noted that the artists who drew Rena captured her vibe perfectly, although they certainly couldn't compare to his android friend. At that moment, the girl looked at the icon with the image of the VTuber, realizing that they literally looked like two peas in a pod. However, she was distracted from her thoughts by Simon, who dragged her to where the meeting itself was supposed to take place. He continued to say something, but the girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't even listen to him. Meanwhile, Jen ran after them as he couldn't let the hero disappear from his sight. At that moment, a man dressed in a red dinosaur costume was watching them. He closely watched their every movement from the side. As it turned out, that person was February. She immediately told June that she had found them, and he told her to follow their plan, after which the girl went after Simon.